Knowing which tech tree to go down in World of Tanks can be very, very overwhelming if you're brand new to the game. In this video, I'm going to go through every single tech tree, excluding artillery, and giving you my rundown of them and hopefully helping you make that decision. I will say this is going to be an exceptionally long video and I don't expect people to watch it all the way through from start to finish. There will be chapters as well as timestamps in the description so you can hopefully find which tech tree interests you the most. Also within the description, I have linked the spreadsheet where I've gone through as I've made this video and said whether they are low, medium, high skill cap, as well as highlighted some in gold where I think that you should probably go down them if you're brand new. So hopefully no matter how much time you have, this video is still going to be helpful to you. Let's now jump back in time and start speaking about the Jagdpanzer 100 when I had a hoodie on. This is one of my favourite tanks at tier 10 for a tank destroyer. You have a monstrous gun dealing 1050 alpha, 299 standard pen and 420 heat. It's very, very deadly. However, the line to get there can be a little bit frustrating because of the Ferdinand. The Ferdinand is the real kind of stinker in the line where it doesn't really fit the rest of the line. Because up until this point, you've had a very sneaky tank destroyer, and then you keep going, you're slowly getting a little bit more armor and a little bit more alpha, but then with the Ferdinand, you do gain like armor, but at the same time you don't have armor. You do, however, get a very, very nice gun with 490 alpha. This is exactly the same kind of style gun as you would get on a Scorpion G, although it's not quite as good. For reference, on the right, this is the Scorpion G's gun. So as you can see, yes, it's just not quite as good as the Scorpion. You see, the problem with the Ferdinand is that it defers itself from the line quite a bit, and it doesn't really match the Jagdtiger, and it also doesn't really match the Jagdpanther, which you just played before. This is quite a slow vehicle, which, after you just come from the Jagdpanther, is going to be quite a shock. And it also does have armor, but doesn't at the same time, because you can pen the sides both here and here with ease. Okay, I will just say this has actually been buffed since I made this video, and I actually forgot that this was getting buffed. There is a buff to the armor of the Ferdinand, but it's not so much that it's massively noticeable. The two side bits either side have been buffed and are not as easy to pen anymore, but it's still around about 200 pen to go through them. So most of the tanks that you'll meet will be able to pen this pretty easily. Not to mention, if they have premium rounds, they'll go straight through your superstructure every single time. But once you do get through the Ferdinand, and I'm by no means saying that this is an absolutely horrible, horrible vehicle, because you can play it and get good results out of it, but the Jagdtiger is just so much better, and then it is a joy to play at tier 9 to go and then get the tier 10. Especially once you do get the fully upgraded gun with the 560 alpha, 276 standard pen, it just makes the grinding of the tier 10 so much nicer. So overall, should you go and grind this line? Well, for the ratings I'm going to give these is low, medium and high, meaning the amount of skill required to actually go and play the vehicles. And I would say that these are quite mid-tier tanks. They're not super high skill cap, they're not super low skill cap, they're just in the middle somewhere. I think that if you want to get the most out of the tier 10 with the Jagdpanzer 100, it is quite a difficult tank to actually do, because a lot of people just go in, do one shot of damage and then die, and they're happy. I mean, I guess if they're happy, then whatever, but for the most people, I'd say this is quite a mid-tier skill level. But if you do want to get more than just one shot of damage out of the tank, it can be a little bit harder. Next up, we have the Grille 15. Now, you actually start this line from tier 6, which means that it actually branches off from the Stug 3G. That means that if you've already researched the Stug, you can just continue grinding the Stug and then go and get the Nashorn. The line in general is actually very nice. It's a really, really nice line to go down. However, the actual kind of playability of it can be quite boring at times. All of these tanks are very much, you want to be hidden. You don't want to get spotted in these things because they have no armor, they have half decent camo for the majority of the time, and they have very, very good guns. These are your typical sniper TDs, and the entire line is like this. The Grille at tier 10 is, I'm reluctant to say this, but one of the best tier 10 sniper TDs that you can get. Yes, it can sometimes just miss at point blank range with no reason at all why it does it. The Nashorn, nothing to worry about. Strv Mill can be an issue. You see, the top gun that you get on the Strv Mill is good. However, if you do meet tier 9, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because you only have 231 pen. And you may look at that and go, that's great. But a lot of tanks at tier 8 and tier 9, which are 1 and 2 tiers higher than you, you could have a lot of issues facing. It's a very strange vehicle because it just has standard rounds and HE. That's it. There's no other premium round in this vehicle. But honestly, besides that, it's fine. You're not going to be there forever because it's a tier 7, and you'll quickly move on to the Borsig, which is a very, very good vehicle. You can either have the very, very troll 15cm gun, which has 750 alpha, which can be fun to mess around with, or you could use the reliable 12.8cm gun, which has 490 alpha, very much similar to what you get on the Ferdinand, but actually, it's pretty much the same as the Ferdinand. I never actually realized this, but they are very, very similar indeed. The Borsig just has slightly better DPM than what the Ferdinand has. There you go. But overall, this tank is very, very good. I recommend you stay with the 12.8cm one. That's probably the best gun on this vehicle. And then when you get to the WT Panzer IV, this is just a phenomenal tank. Because the gun choices you get on this are two 15cm guns, which you just probably avoid. But this 12.8 upgraded gun is exactly the same one that you get on the Jagdtiger, but now you're a nice sneaky tank destroyer. This isn't actually as good as the Jagdtiger's gun because normally if you don't have a turret, you get slightly better gun than the turreted version. But overall, this gun is just amazing. Same penetration, same amazing premium rounds with 352 APCR, which means that this is a true sniper tank. And then you get to the Grille 15, which honestly, it kind of goes down a little bit in the gun because now you're actually down on DPM, down on penetration regarding the premium round, although you do get 334 heat rounds, so technically you have more pen at distance, but it can feel like it's less of a sniper tank than the tier 9. It does get some of the best accuracy in the game though, so yes, it is accurate most of the time, but it can feel a little bit underwhelming when you get this vehicle after just playing this vehicle. WT Panzer IV is very, very good as a sniper. This, having a slower shell velocity on the premium round being heat, does feel a little bit like a downgrade. Overall though, how do I rate this? Well, this is a very high skill cap kind of line because to get the most out of these tanks, you're going to need to know what to do. It's not good enough just sitting at the back and just praying that someone comes out in front of you. Because if you do that, yes, you will get damage in some games, but in other games, you're just going to get 0. It's about knowing where to be on the map and when to rotate and when to actually make trades with your HP as well. That's how you get the most out of these vehicles. So for a beginner, I wouldn't recommend going down the Grille line because you're probably going to end up very frustrated, especially once you get spotted, you have no armor, it's very unforgiving, and then you end up dying quite quickly. So quite an advanced kind of tank line and quite a high skill level that I would say is required to actually play these well and consistently. But on certain maps, it is a very low skill cap because, yeah, you just sit at the back and just farm whatever's there in front of you. Next up, we have the Panzer VII. Moving on to heavy tanks now. The Panzer VII starts at tier 8 with the VK4502A. But before we go there, you're obviously going to have to grind all the way down through the medium tank line up until tier 6, which is then when you first see a heavy tank, which is the VK31P. Up until this point, the tanks are fine. They're your average medium tanks at low tier. They're not amazing, they're not bad. The Panzer IV-H has a nice little derp gun that you can use, which can be very, very funny. The VK31P is absolutely fine at tier 6 for the first heavy tank, and you should go through this pretty quickly. It's not the most insanely OP vehicle, but it's also good enough to just play it and enjoy it. You then move on to the Tiger P, which for a lot of people can be a bit of an issue. This actually has the same hull armor as the Ferdinand, and if you remember to that, it has the side bits here and here where you can just easily get penned. Even frontally, they can just shoot the sides here and here and they go through. It also does have a cupola on top, although we're not using the top turret yet, so that is actually what it would look like, but still the cupola is there. And overall, I actually quite like the gun on this vehicle. You do get a substantial upgrade from the last tank, but many people don't like this. It is quite slow, it is quite unforgiving at times, but can also just have very, very troll moments where the armor just works. And yeah, I don't know. This tank, again, it's tier 7. It shouldn't take that long to get to the tier 8, but just be aware of it. You then move up to the VK4502A. You ignore the VK101P. We'll move on to that in a little bit. This tank is exceptional at tier 8. The only issue you have with this vehicle is lackluster penetration. This has 200 penetration on the standard rounds and then 244 on the premium rounds. And that is not really enough when you meet higher tier. Remember how we were speaking about the Strv Mill at tier 7? Once it meets tier 9s, which would obviously be 230 something pen that had, and it would struggle with those tanks. This has 244 at tier 8, which means that it could meet tier 10. And at tier 10, they're just going to look at your 244 pen and just laugh at you. So you really do need to know what you're doing and where to aim on the tanks that you're going to be shooting. But apart from that, this tank is just insanely good. Very, very good. You then move on to the VK4502B. Now, this is both good and bad. The problem with this tank, if we actually go and have a look at it in game, you'll see that it has this forehead here. And as soon as people fire heat at that, it pens. Not to mention, if you have high enough penetration in general, you can go through this flat surface here around the gun. And in general, the turret is not up to scratch of what you would expect for a heavy brawler. The side armor, however, is exceptional, and you're going to need something greater than a 150 caliber gun to actually overmatch the side skirts on this vehicle. So it's both amazing at side scraping, but also quite bad in the turret department if they have heat. So honestly, this tank and maybe the Tiger P are the ones that you need to watch out for in this line. And I don't like how the tank is going to be at tier 9 and can be a bit of an issue, because it kind of leaves a sour taste in your mouth for the entire line. If the one just before you get the tier 10 can be problematic. But honestly, in my opinion on this, the VKB is fine. It's just you need to pick and choose your engagements wisely, and you should be okay. I mean, at the end of the day, you get a 490 alpha damage gun, which is okay. It's not got the greatest of average damage, but it's good enough, and you should be able to rack up a fair amount of damage, especially if you're side scraping and, again, trying to hide the turret as and when you can. But once you go through the VKB, you then get greeted with the Panzer 7, which is one of my favourite tanks at tier 10, purely because it's quite balanced, but not in a way that you would say, I don't want to play this vehicle, in a way that it's fun to play against, but fun to play with as well. It has one of the best guns at tier 10 for a heavy tank. You have 560 Alpha, 276 Standard Pen, which is APCR, and then 325 Premium APCR Pen. You're also more than accurate enough and have good enough DPM on top of it. But the reason why it's actually fun to play and play against is that the more you know about the vehicle, the better it actually becomes. For example, on this vehicle, there are many, many weak spots, but you can angle those weak spots for them to then become not weak spots. The lower plate, if you're head on, yes, you can pen this. It is quite a struggle to pen this if you're lower tier, but in the same tier, you can basically go straight through this. But if you try and angle it, you then make this lower plate very, very strong indeed. You then also have this weak spot at the side, but again, if you're trying to go like frontal on like this, or just only exposing the frontal plate here and not exposing this, you can counter that quite nicely. And I don't want to go into too much details about this, but I'd rate this very, very highly at tier 10. So overall, what do I think about the Panzer 7 line, and what skill level would I give it? Well, it's going to be a medium skill cap, because it's definitely not something for a beginner to just go into and then they can just roll over their keyboard and get kills. It's a little bit more finesse than that, and the more you know about the vehicles, the better you'll become. Now we move on to the mouse. This actually follows on from the Tiger P, so going along the Panzer 7 line up until the Tiger P, you then go to the VK101P. This is one of the best tanks to do your blocking missions with in the game. This entire line, starting from this tank, is all about the armor. You are slow, but you have lots and lots of armor. You also have quite juicy guns for the tier, and you then can kind of trade quite effectively with other people. Now, some of you may look at this tank and say, Max, how can you tell me that this has armor when look at that cupola on top of the vehicle? And the thing is with this tank is it doesn't actually matter, because that cupola is around about 220 millimeters needed to go through it. Now, obviously, if you meet higher tiers, they are not going to struggle with that. But your own tier for the standard rounds and below will struggle trying to pen that. It is also very, very sloped. As you'll see with this cupola, it's very circular, which means that when you are looking at it, there are just going to be so many points that it suddenly just rounds off and becomes just an auto bounce that, yeah, most of the time they'll fire at it, miss, go a little bit wide, left or right, and it just bounces. The only thing you need to really worry about on this vehicle and going up through the tiers is obviously if they have enough pen to go through the cupola, but mainly is the cheeks on these vehicles. Because if they do have high enough pen, which, let's face it, if you're playing your own tier or above and they have premium, the chances are they'll go straight through here to the right and the left of the gun. The lower plate is a weak spot with around about 200 pen needed, so keep that in mind. So yeah, most of the time they shoot this, they go through. But much like with the Panzer VII, where you can actually angle this tank and only expose a little bit of your armor, you can then get some very, very nice bounces on the lower plate. But obviously, just be aware if you do this, you then open yourself up to getting tracked through here, which they will pen as well. But this tank really does set you up for the rest of the line, because it is basically this vehicle, but just getting a little bit bigger, somewhat better at tier 9, but definitely much better at tier 10. And the reason why I say somewhat better at tier 9 is because the Maltion might genuinely be the worst vehicle to grind in the game. It's slow. You got 20 kilometers an hour. You have 7 power to weight, and yeah, you have 440 alpha, 220 standard pen, your premium pen is 260, you have a cupola, which everybody will pen no matter what, because at tier 9 now, they really don't care. And not to mention, you actually have the turret, which is more akin to the mouse, which has much bigger cheeks for them to hit. This tank sucks. I don't care what people say, this is not a nice vehicle. Because no matter what you try and do when you try and angle your armor, angle your turret, do whatever you might try to do like you would in a mouse, which is the upcoming tank, this cupola exists. And it will always exist, and it will always get penetrated. You also don't have a completely flat side profile when it comes to the turret, which means that when they are looking at this, it's actually a lot easier to pen because it bows outwards a little bit from the middle. You do have 490 alpha, but the problem with this line is that the penetration sucks. There's no easy way to put this. The standard pen for the rest of this tank and then the mouse, you might as well not bother with it. I mean, okay, at tier 9, it's not too bad, but at tier 10, 246 standard pen is just laughable. But once you do slowly make your way through the Maltion, you do get to the mouse. And this thing is just a joy to play. However, you need to know everything about your vehicle to make it truly work. And even I myself can't make this work 100% of the time. This is a stupidly high skill cap tank to be able to make it just absolutely dominate anything you meet. You are very slow. You have such amazing armor, and if you angle it correctly, which is why I'm saying that you really need to know every single bit about your tank, if you angle it correctly, you are basically not pennable from anything other than like a Jagdpanzer Z100 with 420 heat. And even then, if you can try to bait him into shooting something that he thinks he can pen but he can't, you still get away with it. This tank is insanely fun, but you need to know what you are doing with it. Because if you are new to the game, do not grind this. You are not going to have a fun time. You are going to get into game, you realize you're very slow, you realize you have no pain with your standard rounds, and they then circle you and you die. So the mouse line. Where do I rate it? It's high skill cap. There's no other way of putting it. You need to know what you're doing. You are way too slow to make mistakes in this vehicle. Even though your armor can hold up, you need to know how to angle it correctly to make the most out of the vehicle. Okay, hoodie comes off. Moving on to the E100. This tank follows on from where you left off with the Panzer IIIJ. Now, we've already mentioned that these tanks don't really matter too much. You'll get through them and they'll go through pretty fast. The VK31H is a very, very good tier 5 vehicle. It will also teach you a little bit about how the tank is going to perform, but not loads. Because this is obviously still classed as a medium tank, but it's a little bit more of a heavy kind of medium. You get through this pretty quickly again, and then you want to move on to the VK3601H. This thing is quite a little monster at tier 6. Because this gun that you get 220 alpha, but on the premium rounds, you can get 194 pen, which is very, very nice. You also have more than enough DPM, it is accurate enough, and yes, this tank in general is pretty fun. You don't have loads and loads of armor, but it does teach you that you are going to be a bit of a boxy vehicle up until around about tier 8. It basically just follows on from the tier 5, but just makes it into a heavy tank. You are obviously slower as well. As you can see here, you go at 50 kilometers an hour, but you only have 11 power to weight. And that's obviously using the stock engine. If you were to upgrade it, it's still only 12. So although you have quite a high top speed, it's going to take you quite a while to actually get to that top speed. But once you go through this, you'll then go to the Tiger 1, which is everybody's most beloved tank, and mainly one of the reasons why people get into this game to go and play this vehicle. Obviously, it is very, very iconic, and in-game, it's not the greatest of vehicles, but it is okay. You get a nice gun, which has 280 alpha damage, good enough standard pen. Premium pen can be a little bit lacking, especially when you do meet higher tiers. But on the whole, this tank is fine. Treat it like you don't have armor though. If you treat it like you don't have armor and you choose your engagements wisely and you just peek out, try and make a trade as and when you can, you'll do okay. If you think that you have armor in this vehicle, you're going to do very, very badly, unless you meet lower tier. The problem with this vehicle is you can't actually really side scrape, because as soon as you do, you actually expose this part of the tank, which just gets penned instantly. The frontal armor is useless. It can side scrape, but you need to be aware that this front sticks out way more than you think. Once you do get through the Tiger 1 though, you then go to the Tiger 2, which is just a beautiful vehicle at tier 8. This might be one of my favourite tech tree heavy tanks at tier 8. It is a phenomenal tank. Many people think that this is awful. I just don't understand how you can say this tank is bad. It will teach you how to side scrape, it will give you a lovely gun to play with, and you have workable armor as well. Once you get this thing fully upgraded, yes, you do have the same kind of issue as you do with the VKB, where you can get penned with heat through the forehead and also around the gun, but this will teach you how to side scrape, as I said, and gives you a gun which has 360 alpha, 225 standard pen, and the premium pen with 285. It is lovely to play this vehicle, and it's accurate. Then once you're done with this, you then move on to the E75. And again, you just upgrade from what you had with the Tiger 2. You now have a gun which has 530 alpha damage. Okay, pretty lacking pen for the standard rounds, but it's good enough at tier 9. It can be an issue at tier 10, but okay, it's fine at tier 9, the same way that it's fine at tier 9 for the VKB. It doesn't matter that you don't have as much DPM, because you have a much higher alpha, and alpha is king when it comes to this game for heavy tanks. Everything that you would have learned in the Tiger 2 instantly goes into the E75. This tank, again, is just a follow-on from the Tiger 2. It's just a bigger Tiger 2, and it is lovely. And then you move on to the tier 10 with the E100, and this might be the go-to tank if you want a super heavy in water tanks currently and you're just starting out. You get a choice of 2 guns. You get the gun which is reliable, and then you get the gun which is fun. You have a 15cm gun which has 750 alpha, has very bad standard pen, but 334 heat rounds, which is very fun to play with. Or you have the reliable gun, as I said, where you have 530 alpha, you have 225 standard pen, and 311 APCR. This is the one that you want to use for actually trying to improve at the game, and this is the one that you want to use if you actually want to just have fun in the tank. You can side scrape in this vehicle, you can go hold down in this vehicle, you can angle your turret in this vehicle, all of it works. It is like a mix between a Tiger 2 and a mouse in that kind of regard, where your turret is very flat and you can angle it to then bounce lots and lots of shots. This is a very good tank, and should be one of the first things that you consider going down if you are new to the game. So yes, the skill level for this vehicle, pretty low. It teaches you a lot. It will teach you a lot in this vehicle. And the reason why I say that it's so low is that, yes, even though you have to do a little bit of learning, it's a minute amount. And you should learn how to play these vehicles, because once you do, it then sets you up for the rest of the game. So yes, low skill cap, and it is a golden line to go down when you're just starting out. We then move on to the E50M, and this line again is one of those golden lines that you should probably consider going down if you are first starting out, because this is a complete package of a tank, whereas it doesn't excel at any one thing. The line can be somewhat frustrating at times. You start out from the VK3001H, you then divert your way to the VK3002M. This is a good vehicle. It will teach you about medium tanks. You are slightly armoured, not as fast as others, have a good gun, but don't have like massive alpha or massive DPM. As I said, these tanks are middle of the road, jack of all trades style of tanks. Once you complete that grind, you then move on to the Panther, which is basically the same vehicle, but just a little bit better. You then move on to the Panther 2, which again is very similar, and you start to show the signs of what the tank will become. Because as you can see, once it's fully upgraded, this is starting to look like the E50 and the E50M with this kind of squared off kind of turret area. But up until this point, you've had guns where they've not really been super high alpha. 135 pen at tier 7. You then go back down a tier. You have tanks that have, again, 135 pen. Whereas now you can start going for 280 alpha with a long gun, and it is very nice. And I do mean a long gun, because, yeah. But once you complete your Panther 2 grind, you then get access to the E50, which is arguably the most complete tier 9 medium that you can get your hands on. You do still have the option of using the 280 alpha, however, you should not use the 280 alpha. You should use the 390 Alpha gun, which has quite lacking penetration, but it's just such a nice tank to play with. I don't ever really feel at a super disadvantage with 270 premium pen. However, there are times when you do. For the most part, I don't, but there are times where you see someone and you just go, well, I just can't pen you. And as you'll see, this is quite similar to what you had at the Panther 2, at least with the turret, but just a little bit more flushed out. You now have a bit more armor, you have a gun that is very good, and you also go at 60 kilometers an hour with weighing 60 tons. Once you do move up to tier 10, however, with the E50M, some people might see it as a downgrade, but you get a gun which is just better. You now basically have your premium rounds that you had on the E50 as your standard rounds, and you have 330 heat at your disposal for your premium rounds. However, if we actually go and have a look at the two guns from the E50 on the left and the E50M on the right, you'll see that the DPM is exactly the same and the rest of the stats are exactly the same. So you don't actually gain any DPM or accuracy or anything like that, you just gain those premium rounds. For me personally, that's enough to have a decent upgrade, but to others, you might not see it that way. In comparison to the E50M is a little bit more well armored, not by much though. It still has that kind of jack of all trades role where it doesn't matter what the situation is, it can deal with it pretty well, and it does still get outplayed or outclassed by other tanks which can do a certain role better. But as an overall vehicle, this is just amazing. You can do whatever you want in it. It has forgiving armor to a certain degree, unless you're just being an idiot and out in the open. But for the most times, if you do get a little bit caught out, the armor still holds up. You are actually a little bit faster than the E50 because it does still go at 60 kilometers an hour, but your power to weight is a lot better, and you still weigh 62 tons. So yes, this thing is still a ramming machine, and honestly, the entire line is just nice. So yes, another golden line for the German tech tree. Skill cap level, low. Anyone can play this thing and anyone can learn in these things. Much like the E100, it takes a little tiny bit of learning, but once you do, it's lovely to play. We're now going to move on to the Leo 1. Now, this tank, I'm going to say straight away, shouldn't be the first tank you grind, because this vehicle, it has quite a high skill cap. And the entire line can be quite frustrating if you are new to the game. You follow on from the VK3002M into the VK3002D. This tank is actually very nice. It's very good. And the following on from it with the Indian Panzer is also a fine all-round vehicle. It doesn't really have much armor, but overall it works. You can sometimes get some ricochets here and there on the Indian Panzer, but the main reason why you play it is because the gun is quite nice. You have good enough accuracy and 250 alpha. 250 alpha is by no means excellent at tier 8, but it is fine. This again is just one of those all-rounder tanks that is fine, and you just hopefully go through it without too many issues. The thing is with this vehicle and following on is that you don't ever want to be on the front line or even on the second line, maybe second line for support, but you want to be a little bit further back as just that true support sniper tank. And that is where you really start to come into your own with the Leo PTA. Because you go from having a gun that has 250 alpha with fine standard pen and okay premium pen to then having a gun which has 420 alpha, extremely good standard pen and good premium pen. However, the PTA's gun is nowhere close to what the Leo 1 gun is. This gun has pretty bad soft stats, and it can be incredibly frustrating to play it. Not to mention, you have 0 armor on this vehicle. Anything that hits you will pen you, and also probably will hit your internal modules quite a bit as well. You do not want to get spotted in this tank. It is game over basically if you get spotted, and it is insanely unforgiving if you do. This gun basically mandates a stabilizer on it to make it somewhat usable, because if you don't, it's really not a nice experience. However, once you get to the Leo 1 at tier 10, this still has that insanely high skill cap where, yes, anything that shoots at you is going to pen and you really don't want to get spotted. The exact same role applies with the Leo PTA as it does with the Leo 1. But this gun is lovely. You don't need to worry about the stabilization on this vehicle. You can go without stab and it is absolutely fine. Not to mention that if we have a look at the guns between the two, the Leo PTA on the left and the Leo 1 on the right, you'll see that DPM is all the way up and the accuracy is all the way up, as well as the aim time all the way down. This is one of my favorite tanks in the game, but I'm not going to be blinded by that fact because it is a very hard tank to play. If you're brand new to the game, do not go down this line. you need to have experience and understanding of where to go on the maps before you even consider playing this vehicle. So for the skill level, it's going to be high for the Leo 1. And it's definitely not one of those tanks that you want to go down first. And finally for the German tech tree, we have the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, which is more of a light tank, medium tank combo than just a pure light tank. The entire line is a bit like this as well. I mean, maybe the tier 7 and the tier 8 aren't too bad as pure lights, but you still have the you have the DPM there. The firepower is always there in this line. It's one of the best damage dealing light tanks lines that you can go down. But it's also just not that great at actually scouting. The Leopard at tier 5 is very funny. You then have your VK2801, which is fine. It's a bit of a box of a vehicle, but it's fine. You'll get through it. You then have this SP1C, which again, quite reduced in size and is actually quite good for camo rating. As you'll see here, it has 16.2 camo rating. We just upgraded the turret to the fully upgraded one. It actually has a little bit less camo with the upgraded turret than it does with the stock one. But this is okay camo rating. It's nothing exceptional for light tanks, but it is good. You then move up to the Hawk 12, and ignore that I haven't actually researched these. I've played all of these on like press accounts and stuff like that. So on my live account, I haven't bothered touching this. I just went straight for the tier 10. But for this, it's again the same kind of story. You do get a good enough gun, as you can see here. Like 240 alpha with 180 standard pen, 250 heat as the premium pen. It's very nice as a light tank for tier 8, but it's not the greatest scout. Considering you can have an even 90 playing against you, yeah, I know which one I'd rather play. And then you have the RU251, which is like a mini Leo 1. You actually get camo rating and you do go fast enough, but it's quite big and long to actually find a bush to accommodate you. And then moving up to the tier 10, which is, yes, as you can see, it's again quite a big vehicle. This tank will struggle with camo rating, however, it definitely doesn't struggle with view range because this is 420 base and it will see absolutely everything. On the whole, this line is fine, but it's not the best light tank. And that can be a problem for some people, but if you want to maybe try and learn light tanks from what you've been playing medium tanks wise, then it can maybe work in that regard. It's not a tank line that I would recommend you to go down straight away, and it's probably a medium skill level overall, because it's not a super high skill level to actually get the most out of it, but it's also not super easy. So no, I wouldn't recommend you go down this straight away. There are better lines to go down for your first light tank grind than the RHM, because this is quite unforgiving at times. Also, you will flip this vehicle. I don't care who you are, you're going to flip it at some stage. We're now moving into the Soviet tech tree, and we're starting out with the Object 268 V4. This tank line splits off from the SU-100 at tier 6 into the SU-100 M1. Before this, you have the, obviously, MS-1 at tier 1, and you have light tank, then tank destroyer at tier 4. So starting from tier 4 is where you can really start to play the class that you're going to play eventually. The SU-76M is a good vehicle, the SU-85 is good, and the SU-100 is good. So you will not have any issues leading up to the SU-100 M1, or at least you shouldn't. However, both the SU-85 and the SU-100 don't really teach you what the V4 is all about. You see, these don't really have that much armor, have a good enough gun, and that's about it. They're your average tank destroyer that can sometimes go and bounce a few shots if they're lucky, but most of the time they don't really have the armor to withstand it. But they do have good enough guns to fight back. When you go up to the SU-100M1 at tier 7 though, you now have quite a bit of armor, and this is how the tank will be at tier 10. You have a rear mounted tank, as you can see here, and basically the entire upper frontal bit is just unpennable, at least for your own tier. And the superstructure is also very, very well angled and will bounce a lot. Interestingly enough, you actually go down in the alpha damage from 390, which you had at the SU-100, to now 250. But this is still very, very good. As you can see, the DPM is good, but the accuracy not so much. The SU-100M1 really is quite a little bit of a terror at tier 7, or at least can be if you don't really know how to deal with it. So you shouldn't really have any issues with this tank. The only thing that you need to watch out for is the gun arc. It isn't a lot. So that means that when you're actually turning the barrel of the tank, it can't go from left and right very far before it needs to start turning the entire tank to then kind of lock onto what you're aiming at. The exact same thing goes for the SU-101. This is, again, very well armored, but has a very weak gun arc and can cause you issues. This thing also loves taking module damage, so keep that in mind as well. However, with this vehicle, when you get the fully upgraded gun, which is a full-fledged tier 10 gun, as you can see, it looks absolutely insane. You have 440 alpha, 258 standard pen, and 340 heat at tier 8. This is very, very good. Your accuracy isn't that great, but let's be honest, you have so much pen, and you should be in the front line kind of area, that it shouldn't matter. It can be frustrating to play this tank, especially with the gun arc, especially with module damage, but you have a gun that is very good. Now, I will say, as much as the gun is very, very good, there is a bigger issue with this vehicle and the entire line, which is the gun depression. This vehicle in particular only has -3 degrees, which you definitely need to watch out for. However, I will say that most of the time you're brawling and it doesn't matter too much, but in scenarios where you do need it, you really do miss it. You then go on to the 263, which basically goes, yes, you know that you had nice armor at tier 8, have some more. And yes, we know that you had a nice gun at tier 8, have some more. Because this cheese grater gun has 550 alpha with 270 standard pen. However, you are now down on the premium pen because you no longer have the 340 heat. But if you were to go ahead and use the stock gun, you could still have your 340 heat because that is the exact same gun that you last played with. But this time it actually has a little bit more DPM. But this 550 alpha really is what you should be using. This cheese grater gun here, very, very good. And then finally you move on to the V4, which, you know how we're speaking about cheese grater guns? Well, yeah, there you go. It's now got an even bigger cheese grater gun. This now has 650 alpha with 293 standard pen with 360 heat rounds as the premium round. But the V4, you trade off a lot of the mobility as well that you just played with at the tier 8 and the tier 9. You now go substantially slower, where you're just playing with the 263 at 55 kilometers an hour, you're now playing at only 40 kilometers an hour, but you do get more armor. And if you don't really know where to shoot the V4, you just aren't going to pen it. Because if you shoot the lower plate, that's a bounce. That's not a lower plate that you can actually pen. It has a lower plate, which you can then pen. Nice. So in general, this line actually isn't that high for the skill cap. It's actually a very, very low skill cap. However, it can be frustrating to play it because of the limited gun arcs. And for that reason, I wouldn't say that you should go down this straight away. I'd say you should probably go and play a heavy tank if you want to learn this kind of playstyle, because it is more playstyle of like a heavy tank than a true tank destroyer. Your assault tank destroyers at the end of the day. But it is still a low skill cap tank. The V4 before it got nerfed would have been just a straight up go and grind it tank. But now after the nerf, it's not as good as it was, and rightly so, because that thing was broken. But it's still a good tank, and yes, you could go and grind it, but at the same time, not one of the first ones. I think to learn the tank destroyer, assault tank destroyer playstyle, you should go and learn a heavy tank first. Next up, we have the Object 268. Now, to preface this, this is before the 268 got buffed, but I'm going to act as if it has got buffed and then speak about it, because I played it quite a lot on the test server, and it doesn't really play too dissimilarly from what it is now, but it's just a little bit faster and better overall. The line, as you see, will go from the SU-100. You then go to the SU-152, which is a fan favourite among the community because you do get the derp gun with the 910 alpha damage with 86 pen. This can be very, very funny, and many people do love it. You can alternative play with 2 other DPM guns, and it upgrades as you go along, but it's up to you which one you want to play with. You then go to the ISU-152, which is another fan favourite, which has the 152mm gun with 750 alpha, 260 standard pen, and 292 premium APCR pen. And then once you move on from that, you go to the 704, and it's just nice overall. Again, you get the BL-10 gun, which was previously on the ISU-152, then they removed it and changed it for the gun that you now see here, the D4S. I believe, if I'm correct in saying that, I believe so. But now the BL-10 is only on the 704. As you see, the D4S is still here, so it's very, very beneficial for you to go and make sure you get the D4S on the ISU. Then you don't have to grind it once you're on the 704. Because otherwise, you're actually then using a 704 with a derp gun, which only has 250 pen. Don't do that. Make sure, if you're grinding the ISU, get the D4S. But the 704, again, is a very, very lovely tank in general, and again, a fan favourite. It's just a good line. The entire line is nice, and the 268 is a good vehicle. You get 303 stunner pen, which is AP, and then you have 395 heat rounds for the premium rounds on this vehicle. It's lovely. Plus, it is obviously getting buffed, and probably when you watch this video, it would have been out by then. And in general, it's a good line. So yes, the 268 line, it accommodates no matter what your playstyle is. They are versatile tanks for a reason, even though that they are more support tank destroyers than anything else. And in my opinion, another golden line that if you're brand new to the game, you can go and get this, because the whole line is quite forgiving and also will teach you about how to play tank destroyers as well. Next up, we have the Object 277. And I will tell you right now, this is one of the #1 tanks that I say everybody should go and get if they're brand new, because it is a very nice line altogether. The thing is with this line, MS1 at tier 1, you go all the way up to the KV1 at tier 5, and this is where you then start to learn how to play heavy tanks. Obviously, the T28 and anything before it, and just in general, tier 1 to 4, doesn't really matter for any tank line, because you'll go through it pretty fast and get to tier 5 pretty soon after you've just started playing, especially with all the bonuses that you'll get if it's a brand new account. But the KV1 really will teach you how to play heavy tanks and give you that kind of confidence to then progress through the line and learn about the different ways of angling your armor and what to watch out for. From there, you then go to the KV1S, which is basically the same tank, which is a little bit better. You do, however, get the chance to put a derp gun on it. I wouldn't do this. Don't bother with this. Go and stay with the 85mm gun here. Is a much better choice. From there, you then move on to the IS, which is where it starts to form what is going to happen a little bit later on. Not fully, because it's not really the same as like a 277, but you can start to get the alpha damage, and it's a little bit more forgiving with the armor, and just in general, you will learn a little bit more in the IS than you would have done with the others. With this vehicle, you get the 390 alpha damage gun, which is so commonly associated with Soviet heavy tanks around this kind of tier, and you also learn about angling of the armor and what you can and can't do. You then go on to the IS-3, which is, in recent time, it needs probably a little bit of love, because you do just get overmatched on the roof pretty much every single time, even if it's fully upgraded, as you'll see here. This roof line here is just a straight overmatch for most guns that you meet. Not to mention, you have a pike nose, which will teach you how to not side scrape, because you can't side scrape. Even more so in the IS, that you kind of learned that you can't really side scrape in it. But this, you really can't side scrape, because this then becomes flat and easily pennable. You then go to the T10, which in my opinion is much better than the 257. The 257 is idiot proof, but it has to be played against an idiot. The T10 on the other hand has a gun which is just amazing. You have 340 heat, much more than what you get the 257, and you also have very, very good standard rounds with 440 alpha. You are, however, lacking armor in the hull armor department in comparison to the 257. But the turret is really, really good, and you will bounce a lot on this vehicle. This sets you up perfectly for what the 277 is. A fast, hold down tank which can get into positions, doesn't have a lot of gun depression, but has the ability to just move around the map and be more of a fast, medium kind of heavy tank playstyle. But everything gets you ready for the 277, which at tier 10 is beautiful. 130 caliber gun, 490 alpha, 265 standard pen, and 340 heat rounds. Honestly, this gun is the main reason why I'd prefer to play this tank as a brand new account, or if I was relearning World of Tanks, I'd rather play the 277 than the IS-7, purely because of the pen. Even though the IS-7 is more well armored than the 277, or more forgiving, I should say, with its armor layout, the gun just is horrible in the IS-7 in comparison to this thing. And just because I said that this tank's armor is not as good as the IS-7 does not mean that it has no armor at all, because this turret is very, very strong still. And not to mention that the speed that you see on this tank is real. It's not IS-7 speed where it's fake, where it has terrible terrain distances and it never reaches that top speed. On the 277, you will see this top speed. So the 277 line, again, this is a golden tech tree. You should go down this if you're starting out. People will argue to the ends of the earth which one is better, either the IS-7 or 277, and let them, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You have one preference or the other, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose. But in my opinion, I'd rather play the 277. Which then brings us on to the IS-7. The only other tank that we haven't spoken about in this line is the 257. The reason why I said this tank is idiot-proof is because the thing is, you have all of this armor, And the side armor is very troll, the frontal armor is very troll, lower plate is very small, but you just go through the roof every time. And that's the issue. If people know what they're doing against a 257, it dies very quickly. If you meet an idiot that doesn't know what they're doing, and they're just going to auto-aim at you or something like that, yes, you can just absolutely farm them. But the other thing is, it has 440 alpha, the exact same as the T10, but you have less pen on the standard rounds and less pen on the premium rounds. It just doesn't really feel as good. And then once you do get to tier 10 with the IS-7, the gun really doesn't feel good. You have 490 alpha, exactly the same as the 277, but instead of having the, what was it, 265 for the standard pen for the 277, you get 250, and you don't get 340 heat, you get 303 APCR, which is very far behind what the 277 gets. As we'd already mentioned about the speed of this vehicle, it doesn't really have the top speed that it mentions. If we go over into here, you'll see that it says 64 kilometers an hour. It won't reach that unless you do a massive speed build on it. And it just feels like a bit of a letdown in comparison to the 277. If this tank got a pen buff, I would 100% recommend this tank over the 277. But until that happens, I would recommend the 277. And this is not me saying the IS-7 is bad and you shouldn't grind it, because you should grind it. It's a lovely tank. But in comparison to 277, I'd much rather play that. And to be honest with you, I'd actually say that you need a slightly higher skill cap in the IS-7 because of the fact that you just don't have the pen. You need to know where you're shooting and if you're actually going to pen what you're shooting. Otherwise, you really just won't get damage in this thing. And the more experienced you are as a player, the better the IS-7 will become. Next up, we have the 705A. Following on from where the IS is, at tier 7, you get the ISM. This tank is your typical rear-mounted turret tank. It is a side-scraping god, and yes, it barely has any weak spots on the turret once it's fully upgraded. It is a good vehicle. You should go through this pretty easily and not really have too many issues. Yes, obviously, they will get penned with high pen heat rounds, etc., but it shouldn't take too long to just grind through and get the 705, which is a lovely tank at tier 9. And the top gun on the 705 is actually the IS-7's gun, but you're a tier below, and because you're a tier below, it feels much nicer to play with. So you get that 490 alpha, that 250 standard pen, and 303 APCR, which, I'm not going to lie to you, it does sometimes feel lacking, but most of the time, you're playing tier 9, or even against tier 8s, you're not having any issues there. And you now have yourself a tank which is a true side-scraping god. This thing is just beautiful. You don't get overmatched on the roof here. You don't have to worry about any of that. It is a lovely tank to learn how to side-scrape in. And then once you go through that, you then get to the 705A, which is just even better. And yes, you now have a 650 alpha damage gun. And honestly, this line in general is just a good line to grind. I wouldn't say that it's the first line you should grind. If you want to grind a line which is more of a heavy style tank, then the E100 is probably a better line to actually learn in than the 705. But this is a very nice line. Low skill cap, you learn how to side scrape, it will teach you along the way, and at the end of it, you get a very nice tank. We now move on to the IS-4, which turns off from the KV-1 and leads to the T150. Now, the T150 really does teach you what the rest of the line is going to be like. Good at side scraping and good armor all round. The nice thing about the T150 is that it does get this 107 caliber gun with 300 alpha. Very, very nice for tier 6. You then move up to the KV-3, which is basically the same tank as the T150, but with a bit better turret and more well armored all round. You then go to the KV-4, which is even more well armored and a true fortress. You may hear the term KV Fortress when it's referred to this tank because it really is very well armored. When you get this thing fully maxed out, you'll see that yes, this is just a monster. It can side scrape, it can go hold down. Yes, it can still be penned in the cupola, but it isn't super easy to pen this either. Overall, a really good tank for the KV-4. You then move on to the ST1, which is a slight departure of where it was going, where it's a bit more of a boxy tank, as you see, like it's quite a kind of straight, kind of rectangle kind of hull, whereas now when we go up to the ST1, you'll see that it's a little bit more angled and sloped. But this actually moves into how the IS-4 is going to be. You have insanely good armor all round on the hull armor, and the turret is very good. This is a weak spot up here, but again, it's not super easy to pen either. And a really nice thing about this vehicle is that you do get the IS-4's gun down at tier 9 with the ST1. So you have that 440 Alpha, 258 Standard Pen, and 340 Heat, all at tier 9, which is lovely. And then you move up to tier 10, which I don't know why this even has this stock gun, because you would need to go and grab this gun before you even get the IS-4, so it doesn't make sense that this gun's even here. But either way, the IS-4 is an absolute monster. You can side scrape with this vehicle and even over angle the sides, and you can get a lot of bounces where you think, how is that actually bouncing? Because I'm at an angle that is way too, overexposed, but the side armor is just that good. The gun is fine, however, the only real issue with this vehicle is that you don't get that many rounds. And you will run into games where you do run out of ammo. Apart from that though, it's a solid tank. So again, this line, very low skill cap. It will teach you about side scraping. Is it better than getting a 705A? Probably. It's a little bit more flexible than the 705A. But also then, you don't have the alpha of that tank either. So it's up to you which one to pick. But definitely another low skill cap tank, or tank line to go down. We're now going to be speaking about the ST2. This follows along the same line up to the KV3, which it then departs and goes to the IS-22. All of these tanks along this line have double barrel guns, and yes, you can shoot both of them at the same time. However, you do need to be careful about firing one barrel and then the other, because you can ruin your DPM in that regard. It works quite similarly in a way of an auto-reloader system, where if you don't have that extra shell in your gun and you fire, it then cancels out whatever reload you had going and restarts it. The IS-22 at tier 8 is fine. It's nothing special. You can still pen it. It's not like it's a super great hold down vehicle. Even with a fully upgraded turret, it's still not amazing. However, it is good enough to play against most of the stuff that you meet. The armor is also not that great. You can't really side scrape because this then becomes a little bit flatter and you can pen it. And also it obviously has this lower plate issue. But overall, it's fine. The gun is good. You have 300 alpha, which you can obviously shoot twice and then have 600. And you have 221 standard pen and 256 for the premium pen. The premium pen being APCR. Your dispersion is also not that bad. And if you're at close range, yes, you can just double and then deal nice 600 alpha there. Once you get to the IS-32, this is, for many people, the highlight of this line. You have a very good strong turret. You have a pike nose at the front, which you need to be careful of. So you obviously can't side scrape. But overall, the gun is lovely. You have 390 alpha, which obviously you can do ×2 for that. So that is very nice to see. And the thing is with this vehicle, the standard rounds are not that great at 243, which is okay, but no one's going to say that that's amazing. But then the premium round is APCR of 292, which is very nice. Remember, we're at tier 9. We're not quite at tier 10, where that would be not that great. There is times when you do meet people, and that is just not enough. If you meet, for example, like a Type 5 Heavy, you can start getting into issues, especially if he's angled just slightly. Then yes, that can be a bit of a problem. But on the most of the time, this is more than enough. And your dispersion is also 0.4, which up close really doesn't matter. So this is a very nice hold down tank with a good gun and decent enough top speed as well. It goes at 38 with 14 pound to weight, and it has 1,800 hit points. Very good overall as a package. You then get up to the tier 10, which doesn't really feel the same, because this is the ST2, which is basically the ST1, but with double barrels. Although I will say the armor layout is a lot better than the ST1. So it's not like you have the same armor layout a tier below and it's just been bumped up to tier 10. It is better. You have 440 alpha, you have 258 standard pen, and 310 heat pen. Very nice. Again, you have that 0.4 dispersion, the exact same as the IS-32. But as you can see, you still have this weak spot up here, which is sort of a weak spot, but then sort of isn't at the same time. But you also have the frontal bit here, lower plate, obviously you can easily pen. And at tier 10, this does become pretty easy to pen for most people. Especially if they're firing premium, they're going to go straight through the front here. But overall, the tank is good. It's fine. No one's going to say this is a bad vehicle. The gun feels nice. You don't need stab on this vehicle. It can work very well. So overall, medium skill level, because you need to kind of learn a little bit about the gun. But apart from that, the tanks are pretty forgiving for the most part. You obviously need to be wary of the pike nose design, and maybe the IS-22 could be a little bit unforgiving as well. But on the whole, I mean, the line in general is pretty good. We now move on to the Object 430U. Now, this vehicle is not really a medium tank. It shares the medium tank class and it shares the medium tank line with the 140, but it's not really a medium at the end of the day. Starting out, you obviously go down to the BT7, then you go to the T34. The T34 will teach you the basics of medium tanks and is very, very good for learning medium tanks. You then go up to the T34-85, which again is just a follow-on, a nice successor to the T34. The exact same can be said about the T43 and the T44. So far, this is just pure learning how to medium tank, and everything is very, very similar to the last tank. You then, however, split off from the line and go to the 430, which is very different from the T44. This tank is not only one of the best stock grinds in the game because there's basically nothing for you to research, but it's also one of those tanks that you start to realize this is more of a heavy medium than a pure medium. This has very good armor on the turret and on the hull. And combined with this, you can afford to go around with the heavy tanks and support them rather than going around with the medium tanks and supporting them. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go with your medium tanks, because you can, and you're a very, very hard tank to actually fight for other medium tanks. But you also don't have the gun depression. You actually have -5 degrees, which can be a bit of a problem, especially if you're on a medium tank line where you do need a little bit of gun depression. Because, yes, fighting other tanks on ridge lines, etc., you're not in for a fun time. You do get a 390 alpha damage gun with 238 standard pen, which is not good at all. A bit better than what you get at the E50. But then you do also get APCR, as the premium round with 270. So exactly the same kind of alpha damage and pretty similar DPM actually to what you get on the E50. However, this one is nowhere close to being the accuracy of the E50. And then once you move through the 430, you go to the 430U, which then gets a 440 alpha damage gun, 252 standard pen, and 340 heat, which is really, really nice. And you're basically a heavy tank at this stage, because this is, for many people, a better 113. You have the armor, you have the pen, and you also have mobility. And combined, it's very, very powerful. But overall, this line is another golden line. Like, you should go and grind this if you're new to the game, but for different reasons. Like, it will teach you about medium tanks up until tier 8, and then if you want to maybe learn about heavy tanks and how they play as well, while still being fully flexible to play as a medium tank, this is the line. Because you can basically go and do whatever you want. If you want to go to the medium tank flank, go and do it. If you want to go to the heavy tank flank, go and do it. It's incredibly flexible. The only thing that you really do need to watch out for on this vehicle is the gun depression. Again, -5, just like the 430. We're now going to go and speak about the Object 140, which shares the same line as the 430U, but it splits off from the T44 to the T54. This is the line that kind of continues on from the T44. And you do just get better and better and better as you keep going up. The thing is with the T54 at tier 9 is that you get the choice of 2 guns, and none of them are really that nice if you don't want to spam gold. Because as you can see, this has 201 pen or 219 pen for the standard round. And then you get 330 heat as the premium round for both. Yeah, you either have a gun which has bad accuracy but higher DPM, or you have better accuracy but lower DPM. And for most people, this is where it is just a massive credit sink to actually grind out the T54 to then go and get the tier 10. So just be warned that it's probably going to cost you a fair amount to actually grind out the T54 to get the 140. But once you do get the Object 140, it's quite a nice vehicle. The only problem with this tank, and I mean genuinely the only problem with this tank, is that it's 320 alpha. In nowadays World of Tanks, that's not that good. With the amount of tanks that have 390 alpha and 360 alpha, 320 really does feel very, very low. And with the amount of track HP in the game now as well, 320 really doesn't help itself there. Perma-tracking someone used to be the 140 speciality, now it just struggles. Besides that though, you are pretty well camoed, you're fast enough at going 55 in top speed, and you also have a little bit of armor, not loads, especially hardly any in the hull, but the turret armor is pretty good, with 2 cupolas that you can still get penned. And unlike most other Soviet mediums, this actually has -7 degrees of gun depression, which means it can sort of play a ridge line up to a certain degree. Well, 7 degrees actually, max. But unlike the T54, which you've just played, you have 264 standard pen with very nice shell velocity, and 330 heat with not so nice shell velocity, but it's 330 heat at the end of the day. But honestly, the biggest issue is the alpha damage. It just feels really quite lacking in nowadays World of Tanks. And to be honest, I don't see the point of grinding this when you could just go and play an STB1. And so for the skill level, medium, because it's not easy to play these tanks, especially considering with the lower alpha, and you do need to know what you're doing, especially considering that you don't have loads and loads of armor like you do with the 430U. We then move on to the K91, which was fairly recently buffed, and a lot of people said that this tank was over buffed, etc, etc. We'll get into that. The tank line starts from the T34 going into the A43. This is the last tank in the line that is a front-mounted turret, as you can see here. Past this, with the A44 and the 416, the 432 and the K91, they're all rear-mounted turreted tanks. The A43 is your typical Soviet Tier 6 medium tank. It's pretty good. The A44 is annoying. But the reason why it's annoying is not because of the gun or anything else really. It's that you have this hump in the middle of the tank, which means you can't depress your gun down low enough over the front. And the worst part about this is that if you move around to the side, you would think, oh, but I have more gun depression over the sides here or here, right? No, you have 4 degrees everywhere. So even though that, yes, you get a 300 alpha damage gun, the exact same gun that is on the T150, it doesn't really mean much. Because, yes, the alpha is okay. We're a tier higher than what the T150 would be, so you need to take that in consideration as well. It's a nice tank, apart from the fact that the gun depression really sucks. So just keep that in mind when you are grinding this. Apart from that, it's okay. You then move into the 416, which is where this line truly starts to form into its own. The only thing that you really need to watch out for with the 416 is that you don't get gun depression. You only have -4 again. However, you also don't have fully traversable turret. This does not go round all the way. You will stop around about this sort of angle here, and then you need to turn the tank. Apart from that, you have the DPM, you have the alpha, you have the pen. It's all good. This is a pretty nice sweet spot in the line, to be fair. You then move up to the Object 430 version 2, which you get a very nice gun upgrade, 246 standard pen with 330 heat, and the DPM is really, really nice. Good accuracy as well. And while you do gain a fully traversable turret with -4 degrees of gun depression all round, you also have less camo overall. So with that big DPM increase comes a few decreases elsewhere. But it's still fully playable, and eventually you'll get to the K91. The gun is still pretty similar. You are now up to 276 standard pen though, with still that 330 heat. It is much more accurate and has a very, very nice aim time as well, and the DPM has risen dramatically. You now have 3,368 base DPM on this vehicle. This tank also gets a fully traversable turret. However, around the sides of the vehicle, you actually get -9 degrees of gun depression, which is a massive, massive change. Over the front, however, you do only get -5, so keep in mind, if you are going to be going over a ridgeline, you're probably going to need to go over the side of the vehicle to get the most out of it. But the thing is with this line is that even though it is a very, very good sniper line, it still has 320 alpha. And as a sniper, I would want more. It's actually quite rare to use the full DPM potential with the K91 unless you do get someone that just sits out in the open. So this is actually a very, very high skill cap tank line to play, and it is definitely not for everyone. I don't like these tanks at all. I really don't like the K91, not to mention the gun on the K91. It doesn't feel as accurate as it seems. In game, this gun will just miss randomly, and I don't know why, but it does. So it's definitely a high skill cap level, and definitely not one that people should go down first to try and play. And finally, we move on to the T100 LT. This is probably the best starting out tech tree line to go down for light tanks. At least if you want a tracked light tank. The whole entire line is just good. You start out with the BT7 going on to the A20, and this is where you first start learning about light tanks. How they perform differently from other vehicles. And the problem is with lights, up until this point you've been playing light tanks, but really only at tier 5 and beyond are the proper light tanks. At low tier, light tanks could be medium tanks, heavy tanks, it could be whatever you want them to be, because most of the tanks at low tier are just lights. But with the A20, you do feel like a proper light tank. You go fast enough, you can spot, make sure you use binos, because then you get maximum view range out of this, and you'll quickly move on to the MT25. This again just follows on nicely. The exact same thing. It doesn't do anything insultingly bad. It doesn't do anything exceptionally well either. It's just a nice little tier 6 light tank. The LTG, however, is insanely good for the camo rating. As you can see, 19.72% when stationary and moving This is very, very good to learn how to passively scout in the game. The only thing that you need to be aware of is that obviously this is tier 7, so you don't have access to CVS. So if you get matched up against a tier 8 light tank, they are just so much better than you. But you'll then be brought on to the LTTB. And again, this is a little bit down in camo rating in comparison to the LTG, but overall it is still a complete light tank. And it still goes fast enough, it still has good enough view range, and it still has decent enough camo to at least perform as good as it can. Unfortunately, tier 8 is pretty saturated with light tanks, and it's pretty competitive environment, especially considering, well, ELC even 90, EBR 75 FL10, good luck. Another departure from the line, sort of, is the T54 lightweight. You don't quite have the same armor as a T54, but you do have like the combat capacity of more of a medium tank than a light tank. However, you definitely don't have the penetration of a medium tank because this is 208 standard pen and 235 premium pen. No, definitely not. But it can be used in a pinch as more of a lightly armored medium tank than a true light. You have slightly better camo rating than the LTTB, and you do also have more view range. This is fine. It's a little bit more of an all-purpose light tank rather than a true scouting or damage-dealing light tank. And then you move up to the tier 10, which is the T100 LT. And this thing, yes, it's pretty good. 230 standard pen, 248 premium pen, not good. This is what you expect, though, at light tanks at tier 10. They're not going to have exceptional pen because they just don't have that. 280 sort of heat rounds is mostly the maximum that you're going to see on a light tank. And around about this level is pretty normal. DPM is okay, accuracy is awful, but it doesn't matter because this has some of the best soft stats for the gun in the game, which means that it really doesn't bloom out that much when you're on the move. This tank really does do everything. It has good enough camo rating, it has good enough view range, and it has good enough firepower. It is a great all-rounder, and better all-rounder than I would say the RHM, in my opinion, for randoms. So if you are going down a light tank line, the T100 LT is definitely one that you should be keeping an eye out for, and in my opinion, a golden line to go down. We now move on to the American tech tree, and starting out with the T110E3. This line is another very, very good line to start with. However, it can be very, very slow. So I wouldn't say that this is like a number one go-to line, but if you know what you're getting yourself in for, it can be pretty good. As I said, the problem with this line is that it's slow. You start out by going down the standard tech tree line up until the T6 medium, which you then divert up to the M8A1. From the M8A1 up until the Jackson is a very similar playstyle. They all have turrets and not really any armor, but decent enough guns. You then go to the T25 AT, which is where you start forming into the line. However, this one doesn't really have the armor that the rest of the line has. You no longer have a turret, but you do get a very, very nice gun, 320 Alpha, 198 standard pen with 245 premium pen. Really nice for a tier 7. However, once you move up to the T28, this is when it properly starts to form into the tank that you're going to be playing, the T110E3, at the end. Because now gone is any speed that you had, you are now slow, but you have lots and lots of armor. You also have a gun which is 400 Alpha, 246 standard pen with 297 premium pen, which is APCR. So this is very, very nice. And all of these tanks should be played, well, from the T28 onwards, should be played frontline brawling style tank destroyers. From the T28, you then move on to the T95. And again, this is just following on the exact same thing. This has monstrous armor with also a 750 alpha damage gun with more than enough penetration for you to deal with pretty much anyone you meet. And then you follow on to the tier 10, which is the T110E3. You still have that 750 alpha damage, but you have 295 standard pen with AP and then 375 APCR rounds for your premium. It is lovely to have this much pen at tier 10, especially with the APCR, meaning that you don't have to worry about tracks or stuff like that. You just go to the front line, use your APCR, and just blitz through everything. This tank can be a real pain to deal with and is one of the most annoying tanks that you can actually face. Because the lower plate has loads and loads of spots that you can just bounce off of, even if you think that you have enough pen. And the cupola on this tank isn't actually a weak spot. You need 300 and something pen to go through it. And it's probably closer to around about 350. And if you want to use heat, maybe 360, something like that. It is a lot of pen needed to reliably go through this cupola. So overall, this tech tree is really low skill cap, more so than like the mouse, because even though the mouse is slow and has armor, but you need to angle it, you don't need to angle this armor. You can literally just go head on in front of someone and the chances of them penning you are pretty slim, especially with the E3. So at the end of the day, the E3 has a very low skill cap. I would say that this is a golden line to actually go down as one of your first, but you need to realize that these are very slow vehicles. Once you get to T28, you no longer have basically any speed. As long as you understand that, you'll be fine to go down this line and you'll do very, very well. It has, as I said, a very low skill cap. You don't have to even angle the armor or anything like that. You can just face someone directly in front and they'll just bounce. At least for the E3, that is. For the others, they do have cupolas that can be penned, but on the most part, it's a pretty low skill cap line. Moving on to the T110 E4. Now, this tank is basically you take the E3, you give it a turret, not fully traversable, but you then worsen the armor as well. The line diverts from the Wolverine at tier 5 to go on to the Hellcat. Now, this is already one of the fan favourites around there, or at least it used to be. It's been nerfed throughout the years and not as good as it used to be. However, this is still an okay tank to go through. This is still a good vehicle, in my opinion. You can then go and move on to the T25-2, another very nice tank, the T28 prototype, and this is where it starts to then form into the line. A lot like with the previous line, where it's the T28 and onwards are really the tanks that you're going to be playing, or the tanks that it will evolve into. The same thing goes with the T28 prototype. You go and get the T28 prototype, which has good enough armor, but not impenetrable armor. You do get the same gun that is on the T28, so 400 Alpha, very good pen, and then you'll move up to T30 at tier 9. Now, this is where it's a little bit different from the T28, because the T28 at least has some form of hull armor. This doesn't. And some people will say that this turret is also not that good. In my opinion, it's good enough to bounce the majority of tanks that you meet. The only issue why people say that it's not very good is that it's basically the same turret that's on the T34 at tier 8, which is a heavy tank. And even the T29, that's at tier 7 as well. But it's good enough, in my opinion, to bounce a fair few shots. You don't act like you have loads and loads of armor in this tank line, because you don't. If people know what they're doing against you, you're going to get penned. It's not like the E3, where you can just go around a corner and they'll probably bounce. With this, you go around a corner, you better be ready to take the shot, because you don't really have that much time to sit there and aim, because they will then shoot you. But once you go through the T30, which does have a 750 alpha damage gun, again, exactly the same gun that's on a T95. All of these, when they have a turret, are a little bit worse than if they didn't have a turret. So keep that in mind. I've said that before already, but any time that you have a tank line which uses the same gun, usually the one that's on non-turreted is a little bit better than the one that's on the turret. Just because the turrets are a little bit more flexible, so it makes sense. But then you move on to the E4 at tier 10. And again, exactly the same gun that's on the E3. A little bit worse though. And this tank is fine. It's nothing amazing, and this is obviously pre-buff, but even after the buff, it's nothing exceptional. The armor on this vehicle is not great, because if you remember the E3 cupola, this is unpennable. This is very, very pennable. This is an easy cupola to be able to hit. You don't need as much pen or anywhere near as much pen to go through an E4 as you do with an E3. But what you lack in the armor, you do make up for in a little bit of flexibility regarding having a turret. In my opinion, I would rather play an E3 over an E4. And not to mention that, yes, this does get a turret, but it's not a fully traversable turret. It will only go out to around about here, and obviously here on either side before it needs to start turning the vehicle. So just keep that in mind. The E4 is a good vehicle, but it's not, in my opinion, as good as an E3. And also there is another thing that we need to mention with the E4. They are slightly faster than the E3. So in general, all of these tanks, the T28 prototype, T30 and the E4 are all slightly faster than their counterparts. So keep that in mind as well. But overall, the E4 line, I'd say like this is a medium sort of skill level, because it's not one of those tanks that you just play and you just, that's it. Like no one can pen you and you just shoot everything. You do need to know what you're doing with it. And it's not one of those tanks that I'd recommend people to grind first. We now move on to, arguably, at the time of recording this, the best heavy tank at tier 10, the T110 E5. But just because this tank is one of the best at tier 10, does not mean that you should grind it first. Because the E5 at tier 10 is actually slightly different to all the others in the line. You see, you start out obviously going down the standard tech tree up until you get to the tier 5, which then turns into the T1 Heavy, the start of the heavy tanks. This is an extremely good tank. You'll blitz your way through this. You go to the M6, which is borderline OP, and you'll blitz your way through that. You then move on to the T29, which has the choice of 2 guns. You either have the 105 or the 90mm. The 90mm is more competitive currently, so use either one of them. It really depends on personal preference, but the 90 is a little bit better. Although you do lack penetration for the standard rounds on the 90 in comparison to the 105. But once you go through this, and this is a very good tank as well, you then move on to the T32, which is a very, very good tank at tier 8. You have a 105mm gun with decent enough pen and good enough alpha with 320 alpha right there. And then you move on to the M103. The M103 is where things can either go well or bad, depending on the player. Now, the reason why I say it will go well or bad is that with this top gun, you have 340 heat. If you are going to be spamming the heat, you will love this tank. If you don't spam the heat, you're probably not going to have that much of a fun time. Not to mention that the armor layout on this vehicle is not exactly fantastic, let's say. You have a big old cupola on the top of the tank, which you will get penned. Now, there is also just random points in the gun mantlet that you will also get penned in. If they're firing premium rounds, expect to take damage. This is not a super well armored turret. The hull armor is good for the most part, however, there are points that you just die. For example, this is not a lower plate that is like the E3 or the E4 where it's random bounces. If someone shoots it, you're going to get penned. You can side scrape up until a certain degree, but in the turret ring right here, you will get penned. There are lots and lots of nuances with the M103 that make it not that enjoyable to play overall, but then also the gun, when it works, is just amazing. 340 heat really is the main selling point of this vehicle, and combine that with decent DPM, decent accuracy, when the gun starts singing, yes, it's lovely. If you manage to get through the M103 or love going through the M103, you then get to the T110E5. You get the same gun that was on the M103, but now it's just better. More DPM, more accuracy, less aim time, everything that you loved about the previous gun, on this one, upgraded. But if you remember at the start, I said that the E5 is a little bit different from all the others. You see, all the others have quite a low skill cap requirement to actually play them. The T1 Heavy, M6, T32, T29, all of these, all the way throughout the tech tree, not that much skill level is required to really make the most out of them. You go hold down, you can do a little bit of side scraping if you can, most of it is great. With this vehicle, you can't really go hold down because you have a big old cupola. If I just take off the style that I had, you can see here, this is a very large cupola that is always visible no matter where you go. Now, this cupola isn't that bad, considering it's not actually super weak. If someone fires AP or APCR, the chances are if they go a bit left, a bit right, because it's so curved, it will bounce. But if they're firing heat, expect that cupola to be pretty easily penned. You can gun block it and you can wiggle and just be annoying in general, but it takes a lot of learning to get the most out of the E5. This is not a tank that you can just get into and not really do anything and expect to do well. It takes a little bit more finesse to really master the E5. The lower plate is annoying because it will just have random ricochet points, and much like the E3, E4, it's very similar in this regard. Anything with T110, usually the lower plate is a bit of a problem. It can side scrape, but be warned that if you do reach like a 150 caliber gun, you do get overmatched. But the reason why the E5 is so strong at the moment is because it's a complete package. The armor on the whole is really good. The turret armor is really good apart from the cupola. But if you manage to hide that cupola, this thing is truly unstoppable at times. Combine that with a gun that has, well, 3.5k DPM here for me. It's lovely. 340 heat, blitzes through people, and you have all the DPM to boot. So the E5 overall, medium skill cap. The problem is that I would say this is a high skill cap tank, and it is a high skill cap tank, but the rest of the line is pretty low skill cap. So as you progress up through the higher tiers, the M103 and the E5, the M103 does teach you about what's going to come up with the E5, but not really preparing you that much. So overall, medium skill cap, and it's just a lovely line to play, to be honest. Not one that I'd say you go down first, but overall, once you do know what you're doing, go and get this tank. We now move on to the M5Y. Now, from the tier 7 onwards, it actually has a reserve track mechanic. Now, this is where, if you actually want to track the vehicle and immobilize it, you need to shoot the rear of the vehicle. This then means that hardening for track health related items isn't really that important, because if you just show your front track, you're still going. Like, you can still go backwards and forwards, left, right, it doesn't matter, because you have that reserve track. So anything up to or from the tier 7 onwards has this mechanic. Obviously, you start the tech tree line diverting from the tier 1 heavy to the Polak tank. This is fine. It's not, there's nothing that's exceptional about this tank. You'll get through it and get to the M2Y pretty quickly. Once you do get to the M2Y, which is where it really starts to use this line and mechanics, etc., this gun is fine. 240 alpha, 202 standard pen, and 242 premium pen. Really, really good pen, actually, for the tier 7 here. More than the T29. As you can see, though, this tank does have an almighty cupola on top of the vehicle and a side profile that is very long. You then move on to the M3Y, which is basically the same thing. And again, once you get it fully upgraded, you'll see that it's a pretty similar kind of style tank. It's not as long as the previous vehicle, and it also doesn't have as big of a cupola for the weak spot. You do get a very nice gun, 215 standard pen, 320 alpha, much the same as the T32, but a little bit more standard pen, which is always nice to see. And then you'll move on to the M6Y. The M6Y might be the worst tier 9 heavy tank in existence. It does get a good gun, 253 standard pen and 310 heat. 310 heat is fine at tier 9, let's be honest. You're not going to be seeing that many tanks that need loads and loads of heat pen unless you meet tier 10. But for the most part, 310 is enough. The problem with this vehicle is that, as you can see, as we slowly fully upgrade it, once you get the turret, it has 2 cupolas for people to pick from. And the worst thing about this is that it's at tier 9. I would rather play the tier 8 than play this thing at tier 9. It does teach you what the line is going to turn into eventually, but it's just not an enjoyable experience playing this tank with just 2 little ears on top just wiggling at the enemy constantly. So good luck when you get this tank. Gun is good. The rest of it is awful. Once you do suffer through and get to the tier 10, you are then greeted with the M5Y. As you can see, very, very different. More slim, less of a cupola issue, and overall, pretty good hold down vehicle. The problem is it has no hull armor. So as soon as you need to throw in side scrape or do anything of that nature or expose your hull, you're going to have issues. This tank dreams of being on a ridgeline and nowhere else. It does get the choice of 2 guns. You can either go for the 105, which is less alpha, but a little bit more pen, or you can go for the 120, which has 440 alpha, but a little bit less pen. However, the vast majority of you should probably go for the 120 because alpha is better for heavy. But if you are someone that doesn't really care and you just say, I want the gun handling and everything else, then go for the little gun. Overall, the M5Y is fine. It's a good tank. But, again, as I've said, it dreams of being a ridgeline and nothing else. And the entire line kind of dreams like that as well. For that reason, I wouldn't say that you should go down this as one of your first, because it's really not a tank that is super low skill cap. This is probably quite high, in all honesty, especially the M5Y, because you really need to know what you're doing with it. If you go up to a ridgeline and then you expose yourself to the side profile of a tank, you die. If you don't go one-on-one, like directly in front of someone, you're in for a rough ride. So overall, I'd say medium skill cap for this line. It's not one that is super easy to play, but it's not super hard to play either. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's hard to play hold down, because it's definitely not. But you do need to know what you're doing with the vehicles. We now move on to one of my favourite tanks at tier 10, the T57 Heavy. The T57 Heavy line starts its life as a medium tank. You go all the way down to T6 medium and then move up to the M4A1. The vast majority of you will have probably played this game to go and play a Sherman or a Tiger or something of that nature, so most of you should be pretty familiar with a Sherman. From the Sherman, which is completely fine to play, you'll slowly get your way through it. You then move on to the EZ8, and this again, very similar. It has that rapid fire, low alpha kind of gun. You then move on to T20, and nothing is really an issue so far. The T20 is just a good tank overall. You do get a 90mm gun, which is very nice to see at tier 7. You then progress up to the T69. Now, this used to be really, really bad. It's definitely improved in recent years, and I haven't actually played it recently, but the gun is definitely good enough. You have 280 heat rounds, which is super, super nice, so you can definitely spam some people with that. And also, 200 pen is not great, but not awful either. DPM-wise, actually pretty good for an autoloader as well, at nearly 2,000, and the accuracy is not bad at all. You then progress from this, which shouldn't take you too long. It's not a bad vehicle in all. You're still a medium at this stage, however, but you then move up to the heavy, which is the T54E1. Yes, you're going to have to spend all of this time up until tier 9 to actually reach the heavy tank status. The E1, however, does get a gun which is 390 alpha and doesn't have any HE rounds. You have the choice between a 248 standard pen, which is AP, or the 310 APCR. So the vast majority of times that you face an E1, you are going to get spammed with APCR because, yeah, majority of them are just going to not see the point of firing the AP round. However, to grind this vehicle, you are going to have to go through the 90 caliber gun, and there is no way of actually getting the 105 until you get the E1. So you're still going to have to grind this out, which is 43k research to actually get this gun. So just be warned, the stock grind could really suck on this vehicle. But once you go through this, you get the T57 Heavy, which in my opinion is well worth it. You then get a 400 alpha damage gun, which is basically the same gun that you get on the E5, but it's an autoloader. You also get 3,100 DPM nearly base. All of that combined with decent accuracy. The aim time is a little bad. This tank can just demolish someone for 1,600 damage in like 6 seconds. The only issue really with this vehicle, because it's actually fairly balanced overall, because it doesn't have any armor realistically. It does have some on the top half of the turret, but on the bottom half of the turret and the hull armor, not really. The only issue is that it really does run out of ammo pretty fast, which is why we have a little bit of gold ammo. Obviously, the 340 heat, again, is the highlight of this vehicle. Combined with that super fast unload time, it's just a lovely vehicle. It is the ultimate ambushing vehicle, but it is not a super easy tank to play. This is not a super high skill cap, but it's definitely not easy. So overall, for this tank line, medium skill level. I think that as you move up, it's a little bit easier, and the E1 definitely does teach you about the ambushing aspect of the line, but for all intents and purposes, assume you don't have armor, and you should be fine. You peek out, you do your clip, you retreat. You rinse and repeat, and just keep doing that. Not the first line that you should grind, definitely not, but it is a lovely tank at the end. We now move on to the M48 Patton, which is one of the oldest tanks in this game, and this is following on from the M4A1. Now, again, we've gone through the Sherman, we go to the EZ8, the T20, which we've all seen before, along with the T57 line. You then go to the Pershing. From here, you start to form what is going to be the basis of the M48 Patton. You do get a 90mm gun, which has 280 alpha, which is lovely to see. Good standard pen, good premium pen, decent accuracy, decent DPM. Everything is lovely on this vehicle. This, and moving up through the line as well, is just jack of all trades tanks. They don't do anything exceptionally well. They don't do anything exceptionally bad. They are just good vehicles. Following on from the Pershing, you then get to the M46 Patton, which, as you can see, gets a gun upgrade, 390 alpha with 218 standard pen and 265 premium pen. Now, this premium pen is APCR. The only issue with this is that it's not really that much of an upgrade from what you were just using on the Pershing with the 90mm gun. In fact, it's a bit of a downgrade. But you do obviously get that 390 alpha, it is a bit less accurate, a little bit more DPM, but overall it's fine, and it will teach you about the M48, which is coming up. Again, we should reiterate that these are jack of all trades vehicles. They don't really have loads of armor, so don't play like you have armor, because if you play like you have armor, you're going to be severely disappointed. But if you play like you don't have armor, you get some lucky bounces here and there, but you just make trades and just peek up and when you can, you'll do pretty well. You then move on to the M48. This tank then gets a gun upgrade, which has 390 alpha again, the exact same as the M46, but the M46 premium pen is now the standard pen for the M48, and a little bit more actually. You then get 330 heat, you get very good DPM, and good enough accuracy and aim time. The only problem with this vehicle currently is that the Centurion Action X exists. The problem is that this tank is slower than Centurion, it has a worse gun than Centurion, and even though it has a little bit better brawling capacity, definitely better hull armor than the Centurion, and the turret is a little bit better as well. It just doesn't make up for it in the gun, the mobility, etc. So for most people, they'd prefer to just play the Centurion over this thing, but maybe some of you will prefer this. Either way, the M48 Patton line is very, very good. I'm not going to recommend it as one of the most get tanks, or you go and get this first, because in my opinion, you should go down the Centurion line first. This may be a secondary one or something like that. But overall, it's pretty good. It's probably got low skill cap as well, because it's not really that hard to play these vehicles, especially once you just learn what you're meant to do with medium tanks. Again, any tank that is kind of a jack of all trades vehicle is pretty good as one of your first lines to grind, but I would say Centurion first before this one. Moving on to the light tank, which is going to be the Sheridan. And honestly, this might be one of the quickest ones of this entire video, because the entire line is just fine. The problem is that they're not good. There's better tanks out there, and there's better tanks to grind than the Sheridan line. And for that reason, yeah, you basically have an M5 Stuart all the way up to the T49, which are just progressively better and better and better. They're quite boxy vehicles. They don't have loads and loads of camo. They have decent combat capacity. It's a bit like an RHM line, but just American now. The thing is, though, with the T49, you do get access to a derp gun, which can be hilarious. And this is what sets it apart from basically every other light tank, because if you want to, you could just use the 90mm gun and be safe and just play it as a normal light. Or you could have fun and play it with the 152 derp gun. Exactly the same thing goes on for the Sheridan. You could play it with a 105 and play it as a competitive-ish light tank, which is more of a medium tank than a light. Exactly the same kind of play style as the RHM. Or you go and play it with the 152 and you find the nearest light tank and hit him for 1000. But as you can see, it is big, boxy, doesn't really have much camo, and overall, yeah, it's not one of those lines that you grind first. It's going to be a medium kind of skill cap, because they're not super high, but they're also nowhere close to being noob friendly. So yeah, medium skill level. Get it when you've got a bit more experience, or just know how to play light tanks, because then you can mess around really and have some fun with the T49 and the Sheridan. Now moving on to the French tech tree, we have the Foch B. This starts at tier 4, following from the Somewhere S35 onto the Sal 40. And to be honest with you, there's no real issues. Like, these tanks don't really have armor, but they have decent guns. Be warned that the ARL V39 is really quite awful at times, because it has like no gun arc, no armor. It does have a gun that's really, really good. In fact, it's actually meant to be this gun. That is the super good one. Yeah, 330 damage with 223 penetration. It actually gets better alpha and pen when you fire the premium round. A true pay-to-win gun. But for those of you that don't want to use that, then yes, the 90mm is pretty good as well. But you'll go through this pretty quickly and reach the tier 7, which is where it starts to form into the line. Now, the tier 7 itself doesn't actually get the autoloader, but the kind of play style and how the tank looks visually is very similar. You do get a 100mm gun, 300 alpha with 232 standard penetration and 263 for the premium. Very good for a tier 7, remember. The main issue with all of these tanks is that they have this rangefinder on the top right and usually a cupola on the left hand side as well. Now this is where everybody will shoot, and every single time you face one of these things, it gets penned here. So be warned, this line, this is what you need to watch out for. You'll quickly move up to the AMX AC48, which is where you start to get the autoloader. It is the last one you unlock, but this one is also on the previous vehicle. So when you are grinding through the tier 7, make sure you get this 100, as it will help you out once you reach the next tank. But this autoloader is really where it starts to shine for the line, and really where you start to realize the true potential of the Foch and the tech tree. This gun is exactly the same as the Foch, which is at tier 9, and the Foch B, which is at tier 10, but the only difference between all three of them is the shell count. This has 3 shells with a 34-second reload. As you can tell, 1800 DPM, okay accuracy, but you have 400 alpha, 257 standard pen, and 325 premium APCR pen. And if we go and have a look at it in game, yep, it looks pretty similar to what the Foch and the Foch B are going to look like in 2 tanks time. Once you know how to play this tank, you'll know how to play the rest of the line, because they play exactly the same, it just has more shells. Which means that once you go to the Foch, you get the same gun, but this has 4 shells instead of the 3 shells now. And then you move on to the Foch B at tier 10, which has 6 shells in the magazine, exactly the same gun. But as you can see, for this 6 shells, it doesn't really have much more of a reload time, and you have 3000 base DPM. This tank can quickly just disintegrate a vehicle within a matter of seconds. 2,400 clip potential is nothing to joke about, really, when you're on the receiving end of it. This is enough to wipe out entire heavy tanks in one clip. And as you can see, it looks pretty much exactly the same as the AC-48, which is at tier 8. So the Foch B line, medium skill cap, definitely not entry level, definitely not a must grind for a new player, but it is a very good line if you understand what you're doing. The only problem with this tank is that for newer players, it can be a quick, I have all of this shells and all of this potential damage, I rush in, I do my clip and then die, and then that's it. And again, this is kind of similar with like the Jagdpanzer 100, where it's a one-shot wonder type of tank, or one-clip wonder, where once you've done your clip, you then just don't do anything more. And to actually make the most out of this, you are going to have to be a better player. So definitely medium skill cap overall. We're now going to move on to the AMX50B. Now this line starts out with light tank, medium, and then we move on to the B1 at tier 4, which is the start of the heavy tanks. There's nothing really much to say about these vehicles other than they don't particularly have armor, but they have a good enough gun, and that's about it. There's nothing exceptional about them, and you kind of just grind through them and eventually get through them until you get to where you want to be within the line for the next tanks. I will say the AMX M445 definitely isn't bad, but the ARL can be a bit of a stinker, and so can the BDR at certain times. Although you do get a gun, which is very, very nice for a tier 5. And also with the ARL, you do get the funny pay-to-win gun. But the AMX M4 is where it starts to move into a proper heavy tank, and you should be able to then progress a little bit faster once you get onto this one. But from here, you actually want to go to the AMX 5100, which is where this starts to then form into the line. This line is an autoloader line, which means that you have the choice of 3 different autoloaders at tier 8, and they get progressively better as you go through them. You start out stock with a 240 alpha damage gun with not very much penetration, but you'll quickly go through that and move up to the next one, which then has a respectable 212 pen with 259 premium rounds. You can definitely play this with no issues. But what you really want is to get this 300 alpha damage one, which is a lot like the, if you ever played a Liberté, this is a very, very similar gun. In fact, it's a very similar gun to single shot on the AC-46. But this is just an autoloader version. It has 6 shells in the magazine, good enough potential, very nice for tier 8. The only issue with this line in general, no armor at all. And I will tell you right now, this is a high skill cap line, because you cannot just get in this and just play it and just expect to do loads and loads of damage in it. There'll be times in the 5100 where you go around the corner and you think, oh, I've got all of these shells, I can do so much damage, and you die before you even get the clip out. So just remember, for these tanks, you don't have any armor, but you have the clip there when you're ready. You then move up to the AMX 5120, which you actually have the same gun that's on the 50B, but the only difference is that the shell interclip is less on the 50B, and you also get less reload time overall on the 50B. This is a very, very nice gun. You have 400 alpha, 257 for the standard pen, and 325 premium APCR for the premium pen. Very, very nice. Again, no armor, but this will teach you how to play the vehicle if you haven't already learnt from the 5100. These are all quite fast vehicles as well. The 5100 can sometimes feel a little bit sluggish due to its specific power to weight. However, once you do get the top engine, it goes up quite a bit to 17, so it shouldn't be an issue. But once you get through the 5120, you then get to the 50B, which, as you can see, the shell interclip has gone all the way down to 2.5 seconds from the 3.33 seconds, which is on the 5120. Bit of a weird shell interclip time on the 5120, but this now has more DPM and a little bit better aim time as well. But this tank, again, you forgo any armor, you are fast, you have that clip potential, you're more of a support kind of, you could go with the medium tanks kind of flank area as well, but this in general is just your, I have no armor, but I'm insanely flexible heavy tank, and you have obviously the clip there to back you up. So just play as that support role and you'll be absolutely fine. However, as I said, this line, very high skill cap. You don't really want to be playing this line until you understand where you should be going on certain maps, and also just in general learning about the mechanics and what you're meant to do in World of Tanks. Moving on to the M454. This follows on from the M445 at tier 7 into the AMX65T, which might be the worst tank at tier 8 in the game. This tank sucks. It's awful. It has basically no armor anywhere, and even though that this turret is actually really, really good, this is the stock turret. When you upgrade the turret, which we're going to have to get the tracks, you then go to this thing. What is that? So when you upgrade, you actually get a worse turret overall, which has less armor and a bigger hitbox to actually, for the weak spots at the top. But the main thing about this tank is that the gun is really nice. And that's the only feature that's actually good on the AMX65T. 400 alpha, 225 standard pen, 250 premium pen. You have good enough accuracy as well. It's a good gun, but the platform it's on just sucks. And there'll be quite a few people that actually want to go and play with the stock turret and just use the stock gun as well, because you won't be able to use the top gun if you don't already have the stock turret. So there'll be plenty of people that use the stock gun with the stock turret and treat it like a AMX M4 Liberté, because it's pretty much the exact same turret and the exact same gun that you get on that vehicle. You just have a worse hull armor. So once you fail your way through the AMX65T, you then get put into a tank that is actually really, really good. When you first get this vehicle in its stock, I suggest you get the turret as soon as is humanly possible, because yes, you have the AMX65T turret on the stock vehicle of this. Oh dear. But once you do use the 24,000 free XP, because there's no way I would want to be playing this tank completely stock, you then get the turret, which is absolutely lovely. Look at the difference. Look, the upgraded turret, stock turret. What a difference. You don't even need to worry about the stock gun on this vehicle, because it is more than good enough. In fact, most people would prefer to play with this gun than the actual upgraded gun. However, it can be fun to actually use the upgraded gun, because you do get a little bit more alpha. You have 470 alpha, a little bit less pen. As you can see, if we compare the two right here, as you can see, you get more alpha but less pen. But then also you do get 270 AP pen, which is quite nice. It's not quite as good as the 315 APCR on the stock gun, but quite nice to have the alpha damage there. But I think that most people will probably go with the stock gun, because it's not that much of a big alpha difference in comparison to, say, what you get at tier 10, which we'll move on to right now. The tier 10 has a choice of two guns. You can use the 120 or the 130 caliber gun. This has a 400 alpha, which is very similar to what we're just playing with at tier 9, but it has 270 standard pen with 315 APCR as the premium pen. But then you have on the big gun 560 alpha, which is definitely a big increase in alpha damage in comparison, but you get really bad standard rounds, but then quite nice premium rounds. And some people might not realize, but this 296 is AP, and that means that it will normalize better than the 315 APCR, which means that this 296 is the equivalent to 310 to 320 APCR. It gets exactly the same DPM, so it really is just down to personal preference of which gun you would rather have. And in my opinion, if they have exactly the same DPM, I'm picking the big gun every single time. As you can see, visually, this is very, very similar to what you just had at tier 9, but just a bit of a fatter gun. So overall, the AMX M454, it shouldn't be one of the first tanks you grind, and there are definitely other tanks that are better than this, but it's at least fun. Well, the tier 10 is, and the tier 9 is, but yeah, the tier 8 really isn't. But the alpha damage on the big gun really does make the tier 10 at least have character in comparison to what other vehicles are. It's not like a try-hard tank. You can just play this and just be quite happy to just hit people for 560. So I think that this is quite nice, but it's definitely not one that you should go and grind straight away. And the skill cap wise, it's probably medium. Like, it doesn't have insanely good armor, but it also doesn't have insanely bad armor either. So overall, medium skill cap, taking into consideration how it is to play, how it is to play against, medium. We now move on to the Batchat 25T, which is basically a medium tank that is a light tank. You actually go from the light tank tech tree, starting at tier 3, which is not really a light tank at all, and neither is the tier 4 with the MX40. That is definitely not a light tank. These two have some of the best armor at that tier in the game, and yet they are still classed as light tanks. But once you do reach tier 5, you are definitely in light tank territory, and this is where you start to see the true scout tanks. From the tier 6 onwards, they all have autoloaders, which means that they are a bit more of an ambushy kind of light tank, rather than they'll keep doing damage now and again. You definitely don't want to get caught out by one of these if you are in another light tank and suddenly this thing just appears. But from the tier 5 up to the tier 8, they're just good tanks. They have the autoloader, as we've already mentioned, and you can then learn how autoloaders work as well to kind of ambush people, and they're good tanks in general. You then move up to the Batchat 25T AP, which is where it starts to then kind of show you what the Batchat is capable of. This is a mini Batchat, completely. Like, this is the mini version of the Batchat, and it really does set you up for the Batchat at tier 10. This has exactly the same gun that is on the 5100, which is at tier 8 on the heavy tank line, or on the 50B line, and you'll see 300 alpha, 232 standard pen, 263 premium pen, good enough DPM as well. It's obviously an autoloader. It doesn't really matter with the DPM too much. But overall, very, very nice gun to actually clip and ambush people. Both this and the Batchat are incredibly sneaky, and you'll learn from playing with the light tanks at tier 8 that you can do pretty much everything that that tank can do still at tier 9 with the Batchat 25T AP. However, you need to be aware that obviously being a medium tank, you now don't get the camera on the move like you did with the light tanks. And apart from that, it's exactly the same. This tank allows you to be a scout when you want to be a scout, and also go and assassinate heavy tanks and other things on the map when you need to as well. It is insanely flexible and will really, really teach you how autoloader medium tanks work in this game. However, I will say this is a stupidly high skill cap tank. You have 0 armor, as you've probably worked out from going through all of these light tanks beforehand. You don't now suddenly get to tier 9 and you suddenly have loads and loads of armor. The tier 10 Batchat 25T is exactly the same, and the only difference is that you now have a 390 alpha damage gun with 5 shells, 259 standard pen, and 330 heat as the premium. You are accurate enough, you have good enough DPM, and in general, this tank is just lovely to play. This is one of the most flexible tanks at tier 10 that you can possibly play right now. Because as I said with the Batchat 25T AP, if you want to go and be a light tank, you can, and with this tank, you can do it even more so. If you whack a low noise exhaust on this tank, you can get up to 50% camo when stationary. And then you put CVS optics, you have basically got a light tank in a medium tank capability. Not only that, but you go at 65 kilometers an hour, which is insanely fast with very good power to weight. This thing is absolutely devastating as an assassin tank. So the Batchat 25T, super high skill cap, probably one of the highest skill cap tanks in the game, because if you really want to get the most out of it, you really need to know what you're doing, and you need to be both good in light tanks and medium tanks to really make it work. Definitely not a tank that you should go down first, but it is a really good vehicle. Following on from that, we have the AMX 13105, which, to be honest with you, is just a worse Batchat 25T. At the moment, in current World of Tanks, I don't see the point of playing the AMX 13105 over the Batchat 25T. Because this has just as much of a skill cap as the Batchat 25T, being very, very high, but you don't get the capability of being a medium tank as good as the Batchat does. And your scouting capability is not really any better than the Batchat. You obviously follow on from the Batchat 12T to the AMX 1390, and then you move on to the 13105. All of these tanks, starting from the AMX 12T, really do set you up for the 13105 at the end, because they even look the same. Like if we go ahead and put it in game, you'll see French little French tank style turret, for little French tank style hull. If we go all the way back to the AMX 12T, pretty much the same. The 13105 does get an autoloader. It has 390 alpha, but doesn't have the pen of the Batchat in either the standard round or the premium round, and it also only gets 3 shells in the clip. It has horrible accuracy, doesn't have very good DPM either, and if we go back to the Batchat just for a quick comparison, it's just not even funny how much better the Batchat's gun is. The 13105 does get 10 more meters view range and also 2% better camo, but it really doesn't matter because the Batchat's camo and view range is already good enough. So yes, super high skill cap, but don't grind it. I don't think that it's worth getting this vehicle. At the moment, the Batchat is so good that it's just completely useless for getting an AMX 13105. And that's not to say that the Batchat needs a nerf, it's just that this probably needs a bit of a buff to being a little bit better scout-wise. If this got 420 base view range and probably one more shell in the clip, but a little bit more longer reload, I think that this tank would be really, really good. But currently, the Batchat's just better. So no, don't grind it. The EBR 105. Yes, grind the tank. It's still just as broken, it's still just as busted, it's still just as OP as it always has been. It's gone through a set of nerfs here and there where it's got its wheels changed a little bit, but it's still an annoying little cockroach to deal with in World of Tanks. The line itself is actually not that enjoyable. You start out at tier 6 with no view range, no view range, no view range, a bit more view range, and then you have all the view range at tier 10. But when I say all the view range, you don't have all the view range in comparison to other light tanks. You have enough to basically go for your detection range. And to be honest with you, that's all this tank needs. If it has around about 445 meters view range, yep, it's going to spot a load of stuff. For those of you that are unaware of this line and this tank in general, this is a wheeled vehicle. It goes stupidly fast. With how I have it set up at the moment, this tank will go at 94 km/h in the turbo mode for going forwards, and nearly 70 in reverse. When it's not in the speed mode, it will go at 73 and 54 in reverse, and it has 40 power to weight. This tank also has 54% camo nearly, and 336 meters view range. If I went ahead and go and put the optics directive, you then have 446, and this thing is an absolute menace to anything that it needs to spot. But that is the pinnacle. The EBR-90 gets less view range, and it's not as good. And as you go down, it gets a little bit worse and worse and worse. The EBR Hotchkiss, however, is actually a very, very nice tank because the gun is really, really nice. And the guns in general along all of this line are actually pretty good. However, there is a slight problem at the tier 8, but not because the tank is bad, but because the EBR-75 FL10 exists. Now you see, with all the wheeled vehicles in the game, they have to get matched up against other wheeled vehicles, which would be okay if they were only tech tree vehicles. But the EBR-75 FL10 exists and it will get matched up against a Lynx. And when it does that, the EBR is just 10 times better than the Lynx. It has a better gun, better top speed, better camo. It's just not even funny how much better the EBR is than the Lynx. And you will struggle when you do come up against them. The line in general is actually very, very high skill cap because it's not as easy as just going in and just spotting everything. As much as it may seem like that, you do actually need to know what you're doing in this vehicle, or in these vehicles in general, especially the lower tier ones, to actually make the most out of the game. So they are definitely high skill cap, and you should definitely go and grind one, but be warned, you might not enjoy your experience up until you get the tier 10. It is definitely not a line that you should grind first, however. I'm saying that you should grind it because everyone should go and grind this tank because it is absolutely broken in comparison to basically anything else in the tech trees. But it's definitely not noob friendly at all. Moving on to the best nation in the game, we start off with the FV4005, which is a bit of a strange line because you go through quite a few changes. You first start out with the cruisers and then the Valentine, then you move up to the Valentine AT, and then you move to the 82, which has lots of armor, which is a very, very big disparity from what you just played with the Valentine AT. Then you move up to the Achilles, which is, again, a very, very different experience from the 82 because the Achilles now has no armor but has a turret. And then you move up to Challenger and it starts to get a little bit more normal. You know, it has a good gun, has no armor, has a turret, good enough. Charioteer is nice. The Conway is nice but a little bit different now. It's becoming a little bit slower again, and it has a little bit of armor but really nothing you can rely on. But the gun is really, really good. You have the choice of two guns on the Conway, where you have the 400 alpha damage gun, which is the same one that's on the Tortoise. Again, this is the turreted version, so it's a little bit worse than the Tortoise gun. But really, you should be using the big gun because it is funny, and that is why you play this line. You don't play it to be competitive, you play it because it's a funny line. You have 260 standard pen with 600 alpha, or you can switch to HeSH rounds, which have 200 pen but 770 alpha. The normal HE on this vehicle has 70 pen with the exact same alpha as the HeSH. As you will tell with this line, the HeSH is basically just HE that has a bit more pen. But many people will use the HeSH on this vehicle and get that 770 alpha with 200 pen. You then move up to the FV4005, which even though that it does have a turret, it's not fully traversable, but no one really cares about that because this has one of the most devastating guns in the game. 1150 alpha with 310 APCR as its standard rounds. But that is not the reason why it's devastating. The reason why it's devastating is because the HeSH round on this vehicle, that is 230 pen, but with 1750 alpha. And then again, the normal HE, which has 92 pen, but the exact same alpha as the HeSH. Most people are going to fire the AP and the HeSH round and never bother with the HE. It is not very accurate, it does not have a good aim time, it doesn't really have that much DPM, but they play it to get that juicy one shot where you do 1750 or you even high roll to above 2k. All in one shot, which is very balanced, yes. Skill cap wise, medium. It's not super high because especially once you get to the FV, it's pretty low skill cap. You can just sit at the back of the map, aim, and then shoot, and you'll do damage. But if you do want to get the most out of it, then obviously it becomes a little bit higher skill cap. But for the vast majority of people, this tank line in general is just medium skill cap. A lot of it revolves around just being sneaky and just shooting as and when you can to get the damage out. Is it one that you should go down first? Absolutely not. You have no armor. You have not that much mobility. I mean, the Charioteer does have decent mobility, but onwards, you really don't have the mobility there. And the guns with the FV and the Conway can be quite derpy. We now move on to the Badger. Now, this line follows on from the 82 that we already mentioned, and I said that this has lots of armor. It really does. It's a it's like a mobile bunker. That is the best way of describing this entire line, a mobile bunker. You move on from the 82 to the 88, which it does have a good gun, but you also have this cupola on top of the tank, which people can always pen. The gun, as you can see, has 150 alpha damage, about 171 standard pen with 239 premium. It's really, really very good and has a lot of DPM with decent accuracy. It's a nice gun, but you are very slow. 20 top speed and 8 power to weight. Really very slow tank. You then move up to the 87, which is the same kind of story, but you still, again, have this cupola that you need to watch out for. The gun is much, much better. I'm going to need to get the tracks to actually show you. You have 230 alpha damage now with 226 standard pen with 258 premium. Again, good DPM, good accuracy, good aim time, really nice. As long as you watch the cupola on both of these tanks, you're in for an okay time, and you should grind through this pretty quickly. They are by no means the greatest tanks in the game. A lot of people say that the 88 is OP. I don't see that, and neither do I really see the 87 being OP. They're very slow, and they do have that hit point that you can always pen, so just keep that in mind. But you should go through them pretty easily. You then get to the AT-15, which sets you up for the Tortoise, which is the next vehicle. The AT-15, however, doesn't have the armor that the Tortoise has. You do get a very, very nice gun, though. You get 230 alpha with the 226 standard pen, the exact same one that you basically get on the 87, but now you have even more DPM, even better accuracy, and even better aim time. Again, I want to reiterate that this tank can be penned pretty easily if you aim here, or even on the cheeks, here and here, and obviously the cupola up here. But overall, this one should be okay. You'll slowly get through it. The gun arc on this tank is very, very good. As you can see where it turns and can go up to. It's a good vehicle. The problem is that it's slow and it will get caught out and you will die. The reason why I say it's a good vehicle is that when you do get into the correct position, it just absolutely farms. There'll be some people that say that this tank is absolutely horrible and useless, but really, you just need to get into the correct position. I will say, some of the maps, completely useless for this tank, and it's just not nice to play this vehicle. But on the vast majority of maps, you can get into position, play the city, and just farm people. If you get into a tier 10 game, you might as well F4 though, because yeah, you're not in for a good time. Once you get through the AT-15, you move on to the Tortoise, which is lovely. You get a gun which has 400 alpha, the exact same gun that's on the Conway. You obviously have 259 standard pen, 326 premium pen, which is APCR, all the DPM, good accuracy, good aim time, and you also have a tank which has very, very good armor. If the enemy is firing 320 or plus heat rounds, you don't have good armor. But against your own tier and below, this thing is an absolute monster. The things that you need to watch out for is this machine gun port here and also a cupola on top, but you have a very, very wide gun arc to actually hide each one of these. This tank is very, very similar to the AT-15. You need to get into the correct match and matchup to make it super, super nice, but on most of the maps, you can find a good position to start farming. And you only need like a minute or two to really get this thing to just do a lot of damage. Even though it may take time to get to the position initially, once you get there and you start farming, you really don't need a lot of time. Once you complete the Tortoise grind, you then move on to the Badger. Now, this one is kind of interesting because this tank does have more DPM than the Tortoise, but it's a little bit less flexible. Although, also at the same time, a little bit more flexible because it's a higher top speed. You don't have the gun arc that the Tortoise had, but you have much, much better armor. Basically, the two cheeks here and here, where the Kakao logo is, they are 320 something millimeters to pen. It is very, very hard, and if you are using all your gun depression, it is very hard to actually pen this vehicle. There are no weak spots at the front, basically, at all. You will need 340 heat or more to truly go through this vehicle. And while people are trying to locate your weak spots, you are shooting back at them every 6 or so seconds with 480 alpha damage. Because this gun has 480 alpha, 272 standard pen, which is AP, and then you have 320 APCR. You actually get less APCR premium rounds than you do in the Tortoise. But your DPM is slightly up, and you do get a little bit better dispersion at 100 meters as well. Overall, the Badger and the Tortoise are really lovely to play. The rest of the line can sometimes be a little bit lacking. The AT-15, the 87 and the 88 can sometimes feel like you just don't really want to play them anymore and just play something else. But the Tortoise and the Badger, I really loved playing these tanks. It's not one that I'd say that people should go and grind first, but it is a decent tank, and honestly, it's pretty low on the kind of skill cap to play these vehicles. There's no real point of trying to angle because they're just going to pen you anyway if they know what they're doing, and the actual requirement to get a load of damage out of the game is pretty low as well, because you just sit there and just farm whatever is in front of you. So a low skill cap tank line, but it's not really one that I'd recommend people to grind first. We now move on to the Super Conqueror, and even after it's been nerfed, I still do recommend the tank, but maybe not so much the rest of the line. You see, the rest of the line, the Matilda is fine, the Churchill sucks, the Churchill 7 sucks, the Black Prince is okay, Carnarvon's great, the Conqueror's great, S-Conk's great. And that's the issue. The two tanks here really do bring the rest of the line down. And the problem is that it's almost demoralizing, because when you play a tier 5 and you think this isn't very fun, especially if you're playing it stock, it can really put you off the rest of the line. And if you then know that the next tank after it still sucks, and you're going to have to grind that thing stock, it really, really puts you off the rest of the line. The Black Prince isn't exceptional either, and that's another issue. Like, if you've just been grinding this, then this, and you really are not happy, and you finally get the Black Prince, don't expect much to change. It's an okay tank, but it's not great. You have to get to tier 8 to then realise how good the rest of the line is. And even then, when you play it stock, it's not exactly a great experience. But once you get a fully upgraded Carnarvon, this gun starts singing. It has DPM, it has accuracy, it is great. It has the armor as well, and you get to the Conqueror, which is just even better. You have a great gun, the 400 Alpha, 259 standard pen, 326 premium pen, exactly the same as the Super Conqueror, just a bit worse the rest of the stats. And if you know how to play the Conqueror, you'll then know how to play the Super Conqueror, because they are basically exactly the same. As you can see, this is the Conqueror, and then you have the Super Conqueror. The difference between the Conqueror and the Super Conqueror is obviously the gun being a little bit worse, but also the armor being a little bit worse as well on the Conqueror. The Super Conqueror, though, once you get here, even after the nerf, this gun is still beautiful. Good accuracy, good enough DPM, good alpha, good pen. It's lovely. The armor layout on this tank is still exactly the same as it always has been, where it's very, very hard to actually pen this thing when it's hold down, unless you go underneath the gun or to the right or the left of the gun. And also, the cupola is not really penable to anything other than heat rounds. So the Super Conqueror line. The S-Conk at tier 10, the Conqueror and the Carnarvon, really great all-purpose kind of heavy tanks. They're not super fast, they just do their job very well of controlling the engagement. But these two sap all your fun that you could have out of water tanks by playing these two and grinding them, especially when grinding them stock. This is not a nice experience. So even though that they're pretty low skill cap tanks, especially the S-Kong, the Conqueror and the Carnarvon, like, you can just go hold down, you have good enough turret armor, you don't really have to worry about kind of not facing someone, you know, like with the M5Y, where it has a very slim turret, where you need to watch out if someone's off to the side. With these, it doesn't matter too much, because if you just turn slightly, they probably bounce. But with this, low skill cap, but the line, I wouldn't recommend grinding it, especially if you're new. You will not have fun. We now move on to the Canopener, which is, at the time of recording, one of the newest tanks that has been added into World of Tanks. These have a double barrel gun, but not the same kind of system that you see on the ST2. This has a mode switcher, so you either choose between shooting both barrels at the same time, or just a single barrel at a time. And you need to load both shells in each gun before you can actually fire a single shot. It starts out by going from the Churchill 7, if you've managed to get through that, congratulations, and then you go to the Chopper, which is a very, very nice tank. This doesn't have a load of armor, but it makes up for it with a really, really nice gun. Also, you may see this and think, wow, that dispersion is really bad for the double shot. It's not as bad as you think. I have made a video on the Canopener where this dispersion just feels like a lie, because it goes pretty much exactly where I aim it in the middle of my reticle every single time. And that goes for all of these tanks. Like, you may see the stats and think that they're really bad with accuracy. It's not that bad once you actually get them in game. You then move on to the Conceiver at tier 8, and this is a little bit of a monster. You see, you may look at this hull armor and think, wow, that's really easy to pen. No, it's not. This is around about 260mm thick on either side, even when you're trying to side scrape. The only bad thing about this tank is that once it's fully upgraded, you do get a big old cupola, and the lower plate is pretty easy to pen. But actually side scraping in this tank is pretty good. You get an upgraded gun with now 280 alpha instead of the 230 that you saw in the Chopper. The standard pen is fine for tier 8, but the premium pen can be a little bit lacking. You then kind of downgrade your armor once you reach the tier 9 with the Contender. You see, the stock turret on the Contender is actually better armored than the top turret. And the reason for this is that if we do go ahead and put the top turret on it, you'll see that it has a lovely little overhang here. And when you shoot that, it pens automatically because it ricochets down into the hull. But the thing is, if you don't use the top turret, you sacrifice view range. You also then go ahead and sacrifice some hit points overall, as well as DPM and the rest of your gun stats. And when you do get the top upgraded gun, it does look a little bit weird. And by the way, if you want a quick tip, if you want to know whether or not a Contender or any of these tanks are using the double barrel mode or the single barrel mode, one of these will be shut if it's a single barrel. But once you get through the Contender, you go to the Canopener, which at the moment is one of the most broken things in the game. This tank basically is impenetrable when it's on a ridgeline. There is this little box here, which you can pen with around about like 330 heat or something. Yeah, it's, It also has a cupola, but that then quickly disappears when it's looking down at you using its 10 degrees of gun depression, so good luck penning that from this angle. The whole upper frontal plate is just a joke, and it can also side scrape because, yeah, it needed that as well. This thing, I don't know why it's in the game in its current state. It is an absolute disgrace when we were actually getting a pretty decent balance at tier 10, and then they added this thing. Gun-wise, you have 420 Alpha, you have 258 Standard Pen with 318 Premium Pen, and overall, this gun, yes, it was still going to double shot, do a lot of damage. You can do like 900 damage if you high roll a little bit with just 2 shots. So it's really, really devastating if you are close with one of these things. And it's super, super annoying to play against. Do I recommend that this tank should be one of those golden tech trees that you go and grind? Probably not. I see this getting nerfed at some point in the future because it really is too good at the moment, armor-wise, and I don't want to recommend something that I think is going to get just outright nerfed to oblivion in future patches. It has ridiculous low skill cap because you just have way too much armor for what you actually get, and it's really annoying because the chopper started out so well that it has weak spots, you can pen it, it has a good gun, and it slowly became worse and worse and worse. I mean, the Contender was a slight downgrade, but it's still a good tank. It's just annoying. So go and grind it if you want to grind it. It's a pretty low skill cap tank and line in general. You shouldn't be having too many issues. We then move on to probably the best tech tree line that you can start out with as a medium tank, the Centurion Action 10. You start out by going from the Matilda at tier 4 to the Cavalier. The Cavalier is fine. There's nothing exceptionally good or bad about this tank. It is just your typical tier 5 medium tank. Quick fire gun, decent DPM, not that great accuracy, aim time is fine. You then move up to the Cromwell, which then moves on from the Cavalier, becoming a little bit more of a mobile tank with not really any armor, but the gun is still really, really nice. You then have the Comet, which has a little bit more turret armor, but not enough to really super rely on it. And the gun, again, is a lovely upgrade. Centurion gets a much better gun with 230 alpha damage and 226 standard pen, 258 premium pen, good enough accuracy and DPM with some decent turret armor. But again, it's not really turret armor that you can super rely on. The Centurion 7.1 then kind of departs from the normality of what you would expect from a normal gun, because this then gets Hesh as its premium round with 210, which means that you can run into issues if you are fighting, say, a super heavy with this gun, because your maximum pen is only 268 with your standard rounds. The gun is accurate enough, has good DPM, and the turret on this vehicle is also pretty good. However, it is not an impenetrable turret, as well, it's a medium tank. What do you expect? It's not going to be a heavy tank. It's not going to have a turret where you go on a ridgeline and everybody will just bounce. You need to be making that quick play, go up, shoot off the ridgeline, and then pull back down again. But once you get to tier 10, you then have the standardized kind of gun, 390 alpha, 268 standard pen, which is exactly the same as you had on the previous tank, but you do get 330 heat, which means that you can deal with pretty much anybody you meet. And this tank really is like a jack of all trades, but even better than like the Patton or even the E50M in my opinion. This tank is one of those vehicles that it just doesn't matter how good or bad you are, it just plays to whatever you want to play it as. You have good enough hit points, you have good enough DPM, good enough accuracy, good enough gun in general, good enough mobility, and you even have view range with a little bit of camo as well. This, in my opinion, is the perfect tank to go down if you're beginning the medium tank grinds in World of Tanks. It will teach you everything you need to know, and you can always fall back to one of these tanks and just learn a little bit more about how to play mediums. They might not be the most forgiving because they don't have loads and loads of armor, but they will teach you about how to play on ridgelines and where to go on different maps. So yes, the Centurion Action 10 line, absolutely, go and grind it. It's a pretty low skill cap overall for medium tanks because once you know how to play them, this really does just fit very, very nicely in World of Tanks currently. You start out by going from the Cruiser 2 at tier 2, then the Cruiser 3, then the Cruiser 4, very aptly named for the tiers that they're at. You then move into the AEC, which is the first tank that is the wheeled vehicle. Now all of these tanks from the AEC onwards all have wheels instead of tracks, but they're not like the EBR where it's super fast and agile. They are quite sluggish. You see, they all have very, very good guns, but the platform they're on really isn't that nice. The AEC and the Staghound are typical boxy vehicles which just have good enough guns, as you see here, very, very similar to the punchy kind of guns that you see on like the Cromwell or Cavalier. The FSV at tier 7, which is one of the best looking tanks in the game in my opinion, absolutely beautiful. This actually gets pretty decent camo, and you can play it as a little bit of a scout if you want to. You then have the Saladin, which gets a little bit of a better gun with 250 alpha and 221 standard pen, 255 premium pen with decent accuracy and aim time again. And then the G-Saw 1006 Scheme 7, which has one of the best guns at tier 9. But again, you're in a kind of platform which just isn't good. And this is the exact same thing for the Concept 5 at tier 10. You get a gun which has 430 alpha, 260 standard pen, and 318 premium APCR pen, but it doesn't matter because the platform it's on just isn't good. Guns are great, but the rest of the tank is like a slug to turn, and it really doesn't feel very nice to play. So these tank lines, they are more of a sniper medium tank than anything else. Especially once you go from the tier 8 onwards. The tier 7 can kind of be a little bit more of an all-purpose tank, be a little bit of a scout as well. The tier 8 onwards, they are the kind of sniping tanks, and that's it. They can't really play in any other role. Big, boxy, bit of a slug to move, and I wouldn't recommend you go down this. Overall, probably medium skill cap because, again, you need to know where you're going with these different vehicles, and they can be a little bit annoying to play if you don't know what you're doing. But a good player will be able to make these work, whereas a bad player will probably struggle in them quite a bit. We now move on to the Manticore, which is the best passive light tank in the game, although the Even 19 might have questions about that. However, the line that leads up to the Manticore, it's not great. You start out with the Covenanter at tier 5, following on from the Cruiser 4, and you then move on to the Crusader, and these two are pretty similar. But once you move on to the Setter, this is where it then becomes into a true kind of a light tank. The thing is, with all of these tanks, the guns, you might as well not even have the gun, because they have no DPM, they have no real alpha damage in comparison to their DPM that they have, and they just have that scout ability, although it definitely does look cool. You then move up to tier 8 with the Lumtava, LHMTV, which basically looks exactly the same, but just a little bit different. It looks a bit French. I don't like that. But overall, it's an okay tank. You just need to scout with it. The exact same thing is with the G-Saw. It's just a good vehicle as a scout, but nothing else. And the same thing goes for the Manticore. But the Manticore properly suffers with the ammo capacity. This tank gets 20 ammo capacity. That is it. There will be times where you run out of ammo, whether you've missed shots or not. This thing is a problem. It has some of the best camo in the game, it has a good top speed, and the scout ability is exceptional. But you don't have DPM, you don't have the ammo capacity, and you only have 390 alpha, which, if it has this little ammo, why is this a thing? For example, the EBR 105 has the same alpha damage, has more DPM, but has loads more shells. And this is like the pinnacle of, you just don't have DPM in any of these tanks. So the Manticore, if you are a true light tank lover and you know how to passive scout, get this tank. It is great. It has a stupidly high skill cap, but the tank and the tank line do work quite well if you're just going to be a light tank. If you try to be anything other than a light tank, and sometimes even the light tanks in the line, like the Setter, the Lumtava, and the G-Saw, they all kind of suffer a little bit in comparison to other vehicles sometimes when it just comes to pure scouting. But the Manticore, that thing is the true passive light tank. So no, don't grind this tank if you're new. This is like out of the question. Bad idea. Go and grind something else like a T100 LT and you'll be much happier. But if you do know what you're doing, this is great. We now move on to the Chinese tech tree, starting out with a WZ113GFT. This is actually a very, very nice line to start out to go and grind. But I wouldn't say that it's one of those golden tech tree lines because it definitely doesn't just fit absolutely everybody. It's not like the T110E3 line where you have lots and lots of armor, and it's not like the 268 line where you're a bit more flexible in kind of every aspect. You start out by going from the Chi Ha at tier 3 to the SU76G FT. This tank and the 60G FT are pretty similar, and they don't really give you anything that is extra special. They are typical tier 5 and tier 4 tank destroyers. At tier 6, you then start to go into the realms of how the tank line might progress. You get a little bit of frontal armor, but by no means anything that you should write home about, but you start to see the vision of the tank line. You have a gun that is good enough, 250 alpha with 181 standard penetration. At tier 6 is very, very good. You then move up to the T34 2G FT. These names are absolutely abysmal to try and pronounce. But you then go ahead and get a 122 caliber gun with 390 alpha, 192 standard pen, and 250 premium pen. The premium pen being heat as well, which is very, very nice. Remember, this is at tier 7. At tier 8, you then go ahead and get a gun which is just a monster. And you also start to have a lot more armor, although again, you don't have loads and loads of armor to the point where you're basically impenetrable. None of these tanks do. But this gun, 560 alpha, 271 standard pen, and 340 heat pen on the premium round is amazing. And then you amp everything up with the tier 9 WZ111G FT, where you get a 750 alpha damage gun, 290 standard AP pen with 395 heat pen. And this is the exact same gun that you get on the WZ at tier 10, but this is obviously just slightly worse. This tier 9 and the tier 10 are absolute monsters, and they are two tanks that you should consider going to get and at least playing because they are very, very good. The tier 10 is just a little bit better with regards to DPM and accuracy in comparison to the gun at tier 9 here, as you can see. But you also have the fact that the armor layout is actually pretty similar from the tier 9 as it is to the tier 10, which means that tier for tier, you may prefer the tier 9 to the tier 10. So the WZ line is really, really nice as assault tank destroyers, but they're not so user-friendly as, say, like an E3, which has loads and loads of armor, is very forgiving, or as flexible as like a 268, which doesn't try to be an assault tank destroyer, it just kind of goes and does whatever it wants. Whereas this, it is really good, but you need to know what you're doing. So medium kind of skill cap for these tanks. But I do recommend you go down it at some point because these two at the end here are lovely. We now move on to the BZ75. Now the main feature of this line is that they have rocket boosters. Starting out from the tier 7 with the BZ58 all the way up to tier 10, it will have the rocket booster option. You use this by using the X key or whatever you have for the mode switching inside World of Tanks. What it then gives is a boost in acceleration and top speed, but you only have a few uses that you can do in-game. The other drawback to all of this is that you aren't as fast when you're not using the rocket boosters as, say, other tanks. Which can be quite annoying because if you do see other tanks on your team and you're trying to chase damage and you don't have any boost left, you're just lacking behind. The line in general is fine. You go all the way up through the light tanks up until the tier 5, which then turns into a type T34. You then have the type 58, and this is basically a T3485. This copies quite closely to the Soviet tech tree where you have a T34, then T3485, and this type 58 is basically the same. It even gets the 85mm gun. From there, though, you will then go to the BZ58, and this is where it starts with the rocket boosters. The BZ58 is your typical kind of heavy tank. You do have rocket boosters, which gives it a little bit of an edge over other tanks, but we've already mentioned about the drawbacks as well. You then go up to the BZ166. Now, this is following on from what the last tank was, but you have a much better hull armor on this tank. As you can see, this is very well sloped, and the lower plate, it is quite big, but it's also quite angled. And the thing is with this lower plate is that there are loads of different points here where you can actually get bounces on this. If you go a little bit too far right or left, you will end up bouncing. You cannot, however, side scrape because this bit becomes very, very weak on either side. Once again, Editing Max is back, and this is because I kind of forgot about the gun on this vehicle. You see, this tank, yes, it does have pretty good armor for what it is, but the gun really can just let you down massively. It's not quite as bad as a lot of people make it out to be, but you will notice it when you're playing it. And that's actually something that goes for the whole line that I kind of forgot about, because it's been a while since I actually played this vehicle and this line in general. You need to be quite aware that these guns, even though they are quite high alpha, come at the cost of the accuracy. You'll also notice that this is the only gun. You don't need to grind a gun on this tank, only the turret is needed. The same thing goes with the BZ68. You get the gun straight away, and the gun is very good. 530 alpha now, with 248 standard pen and 315 heat as the premium round. But you will quickly go through and get up to the BZ75, which now has a 650 alpha damage gun, 258 standard pen, and 319 heat pen. You also get 90 HE with 840 alpha, which is very, very nice. However, this vehicle does suffer with the cupolas. There is 1, 2, 3 cupolas to pick from. The rest of the tank, though, is very, very well armored, and you can even side scrape to a certain degree if they don't have super high pen, because this is around about 280mm thick to go through here. But overall, the line in general, it does feel a little bit like a gimmick, where you kind of have these rocket boosters, but you're so slow without them that it kind of makes it mandatory to end up using them, and if you then get to a position and it's just wrong, you're then kind of stuck there. So this can be a good tank, but it definitely takes some learning on how and when you should use them. So I'd say like a medium type of skill cap tank, definitely not one that you should go down first. We're now going to be speaking about the WZ1115A. I would say that this is a golden tech tree line, but you don't start the actual heavy tank line until tier 7, which if you're a new player, that's going to be quite a shock to you to suddenly be at tier 7 and you're changing class completely. Because this is basically like a Chinese sort of version of the 277. You sacrifice some armor, but you gain a little bit more DPM and a little bit more gun depression. And honestly, the line from the tier 7 onwards is nice. They're not really super high skill cap tanks. It's the IS-2, so if you know how to play an IS, you're going to know how to play this. But you haven't had the experience beforehand. You'd have come from a Type T34, then a Type 58, which doesn't teach you anything about playing heavy tanks, into suddenly the IS-2. You then come to the 110, which is okay. It's not an exceptional vehicle. You really need to know about this pike nose design, because this can make you very, very angry at times because you want to side scrape, but you just cannot. It's a lot like the IS-3, but a little bit worse because it's so pronounced. But overall, none of these tanks are inherently bad, and you actually get a very, very nice tank at tier 9 that sets you up perfectly for what you're about to play at tier 10. The WZ14 gets a very, very similar gun to what you're about to play at tier 10, just with a little bit less pen. And honestly, you get to learn everything you need to know, and then by the time you get to tier 10, you're ready. And then when you do get to the 5A, you have that same 130 caliber gun, but just a bit more pen on the standard round. The standard pen isn't good, but the premium pen at 340 heat is very good. And this is one of the main drawbacks from probably making it like a golden line as well, is that the standard pen really does suffer quite a bit. At tier 9, 244 standard pen is not terrible, but it's not good. But at tier 10, 250 is not nice. But as you can also see, this is very, very similar to what you just saw with the WZ14. So yes, the WZ1115A, pretty low skill cap. There's not really much to learn. You will learn along the way, but it's quite forgiving as well. Some people will prefer this tank to the 277, and that's fine, but I wouldn't say that this is like a must grind, like straight away type of vehicle to try and learn stuff in. I think you'll learn more in the 277 line because you've played heavy tanks basically from tier 5. Now moving into the 121. Now this is a bit of an interesting line because you follow on from the medium tanks down at the Type 58, you then move into the T34-1, and it's just a perfect continuation of the line. T34-2, WZ120, then the 121. It is a perfect continuation of each medium tank getting progressively better and better. The only issue you have with this line, no gun depression. You go from having 5 degrees, 5 degrees, 3 degrees, 5 degrees. That is the maximum gun depression you're going to get. And for a medium tank, this can be really bad. Especially the WZ120 at tier 9, this gun depression problem with 3 degrees is quite annoying. And I think that it's a real shame as well because these tanks are really, really nice. It's just the gun depression that lets it down. You have a good tank at the T34-1, T34-2, then the WZ120 with one of these guns that is super, super nice as well regarding DPM. Like 440 alpha, 250 standard pen, 340 heat as the premium pen is really, really good. And then you move up to the tier 10, which has 262 standard pen with 340 heat, which is lovely, and good accuracy with good DPM. It's really, really nice. It's just the gun depression that lets it down. And for skill cap wise, it's going to be medium because they are not super easy to play, but they're also not super hard to play. They're just quite annoying to play. and you need to know a little bit about the game to know where to go. Because in most situations, you can't just play this tank exactly the same as the other tanks, because they just don't have the gun depression. So no, I don't recommend you grind this line until you know what you're getting yourself in for. If you can live without gun depression, then it's actually a nice line. But in World of Tanks at the moment, you're going to need more than 3 degrees, especially at tier 9. And that is a lot of grinding to do at 3 degrees. We're now going to be moving on to the WZ1321. This is the worst light tank at tier 10. You should not bother grinding this line. Unless they mega buff it, in which case then maybe consider it. This is not worth it in its current state. The thing is with this line is that they removed any fun out of the 5916, and even though it's not bad, it's just not what it used to be, because this has an autoloader, which was very funny, and then they removed it, and now it's just your typical kind of tier 6 light. And then they're just bang average, no gun depression style of the tanks. There's no point of playing them. The tier 10 in particular is what I'm going to focus on right now, because it's not a good light tank, and it doesn't even do a good job being like a heavy light tank where it could be a medium. The RHM outclasses it, the Sheridan outclasses it when it wants to be a damage dealer, and everything outclasses it pretty much when it wants to be a light tank. You have a gun which has 390 alpha, but so does the Sheridan and the RHM, and they both have more DPM and better accuracy than you. You have only 5 degrees of gun depression, and even though that you have some form of armor, it's not enough armor to suddenly go and become a medium tank. It just doesn't make sense why this tank is existing, to be honest. So no, don't bother grinding this tank, and the skill cap wise, or skill level wise, it'll be very high. Only the very, very advanced players could make this tank work. For the rest of us, it's absolutely useless. Moving on to the Japan, and I need to preface this again because this tank is getting nerfed along with a few other tanks in the line. But it doesn't really change the whole kind of feel, because the only one that's getting mega nerfed is the Cheeto SP, and that deserved it. The line starts going from the light tanks all the way at tier 1, and then you go to a medium tank at tier 4 with a Chi-He. You then go up to the HoRi 3, which is your typical kind of tier 5 TD. Nothing exceptional, but it's a good vehicle nonetheless. The Grille is the same kind of story, where it's just your typical tier 6 tank destroyer, but you do get quite a nice gun with 300 alpha and 175 pen. Very nice indeed. You then go to the Cheeto SP. At the time of recording, I don't know how the nerfs are going to impact it. Since this video has actually taken me so long to edit, I can tell you that the Cheeto SP nerfs were fine. They done what they were meant to do, and they helped balance out the tank. It is still okay to play, but it's nowhere close to what it used to be. The HoRi 2 is absolutely fine. You do get a very, very nice gun with 400 alpha, 250 standard pen, and 285 premium AP pen, which is very, very important to note. All of these tanks, even the Cheeto SP, do get AP as their premium round, which is lovely. The HoRi 1 is a similar kind of story, where you have 650 alpha, 290 for the AP on the standard rounds, and 325 AP for the premium round. Very, very nice. And then you get up to the HoRi 3, which has the 700 alpha, 305 standard AP, and 360 premium AP, which is one of the best rounds in the game. The thing is with this entire line is that they don't really have armor, but you just need to play them a little bit passively, and they can go in to do damage as and when they can, and they can rely on their armor sometimes, but on the most part, what is going to shoot you will probably pen. And if you treat them like that, you'll get a lot of damage out of it. Because the vast majority of the time, you can out-trade people, and you have so much pen with your premium rounds that it's just not really going to matter what you're facing. So skill cap wise, this is definitely medium level, because it's definitely not easy to play these vehicles. And the more experienced you are, the better you will do. We're now going to be speaking about Type 71 line, and from tier 8 onwards, this gets a gun cooling mechanism, where if you haven't fired the gun for a certain amount of time, it will then reduce your accuracy, or increase your accuracy, I should say, reduce the dispersion, then increasing your accuracy, to make you more accurate. But this goes and follows on from the Chi-He at tier 4 to then go to the Mitsu 108. I won't lie to you, I know nothing about this Mitsu 108. It seems okay though, like you get a pretty decent gun, and the armor seems like everything will pen you. In fact, I just looked up the armor profile. Yes, everything will pen you. But you'll quickly move on to the Juno, which is your typical tier 6 heavy tank. It has some form of armor as long as people aren't spamming gold, and if they are, then you're probably just not going to have any armor at all. But again, you do have a nice gun, 230 alpha, 150 standard pen, and 208 premium pen, which is lovely. You then move up to the Ju 2, which is a little bit of a downgrade in the turret department, because even standard rounds that you're probably going to face will end up penning you. You do get a nice gun, however, with 195 standard pen and not so great premium pen at only 230, but you get 320 alpha. Once you move up to the tier 8, however, you get the Type 57, and this is where you get the gun cooling mechanism. As you'll see, this has a 360 alpha damage gun, 225 standard pen, and 252 premium pen, which is not actually really that much of a step up from what you had previously, but it is around what you would expect for a tier 8 heavy. As you can see, the dispersion is 0.4 when you're not in the cooling mode, but when you are, you have 0.24. And you have to wait 15 seconds after firing to then activate this 0.24 accuracy. Now, it's not always going to be beneficial to wait a whole 15 seconds after firing, and yes, it does count your reload time in that time as well, but it is nice that every now and again you will get this when you have a bit of a lull in the combat. So it does feel a little bit like a gimmick, this mechanic, but at the same time it does help as well. The armor layout on this tank is also quite nice. It can be extremely troll when you're trying to side scrape and just wiggling. It's very, very troll indeed, especially with all of these different kind of angles that you have at the front plate here. Like, look at that. There's loads of different angles that people can bounce off of you. So it is quite a nice tank to play, but at the same time, the gun mechanic can be quite annoying and quite inaccurate as well if you're not in that cooling mode. You then move up to the tier 9, which is the Type 68. This also has a siege mode mechanic. What this is when the tank is going slow enough, you will have extra gun depression and elevation by just rotating or moving your hull more downwards or upwards using the suspension. You don't need to activate anything for this specific siege mode mechanic. For other tanks such as the STRV line, which we'll get onto, you do need to activate it, but for this, it's just going slow enough will actually trigger it. For this tank specifically, anything over 25 km/h won't let you enter the siege mode. You do get a very nice gun with 400 alpha, 250 standard pen, and 311 APCR for the premium. Again, you have a quite bad accuracy without the cooling mode, but then with the cooling mode, you have 0.24 again. This tank actually has very, very good armor, and when you are using your full gun depression, it's quite a problem to deal with this tank. You then move up to tier 10 with a Type 71. This gets a 120mm caliber gun, you have 400 alpha, 260 standard pen, but 320 APCR as the premium. You also get a little bit better accuracy without the cooling mode at 0.38 rather than 0.4, but you also get a little bit better with the cooling mode at 0.22. You also only have to wait 12 seconds rather than the 15 on the Type 57 or the 14 on the Type 68, so this is actually going to enter that mode a lot sooner as well. This again has the same siege mode, which means that you can go into it under 25 km/h to give you more gun depression. The turret is really, really good, and if you're using all your gun depression, it is exceptional. However, there is a problem with this tank that you can pretty much always pen, and that is that there is a cupola on the hull armor. This is always pennable no matter where you are and what you're doing. You can always just go and pen this. So if you do see someone that is hull down with a Type 71, just go and pen this every single time. But the line in general is okay. It's nothing exceptional. It's nothing that I would say you need to rush out and grind. The Type 71 for me personally, I don't really enjoy that much. I think there's better tanks that you can just go and play, but it is an okay experience and it's not really a bad grind. Especially once you're fully upgraded and you're really starting to grind out that big XP for that next vehicle. So overall, I'd probably say that this line is a medium kind of skill cap level because they're not tanks that you can just go and sit out in front of people and they just bounce off of you. Whereas, you know, I mean, with the Type 57, you probably could, but not with the Type 68 and the Type 71. I think when you get these quite out in the open, they definitely die. And I do think that you do need to know what you're doing with them. And you can't just go and put a noob in this tank and just say, there you go, it's the best tank in the game, and they're going to do absolutely amazingly. So overall, medium type of skill level required for this tank. We now move on to the Type 5 Heavy. Now, this is one of those lines that it's not that great. You go all the way up to the Chi Nu at tier 5, and then you move into the OI. The OI is funny, because you have a massive derp gun with 700 alpha, 121 standard pen, and 150 premium pen. It is a funny tank. You then go into the Oni, which does get the same derp gun, but being a tier higher, it's not as good. This is purely because there's less targets that you can actually pen, so realistically, you should use a 10cm gun with 330 alpha, 190 standard pen, and 215 premium pen. It's actually quite nice. But the problem with the Oni is that it has these machine gun ports or little cannons at the front that you can just pen. And this is exactly the same thing for the OHO as well. It has these kind of machine gun ports here that you can just pen every single time. making it very, very useless. Not only that, but it actually gets in the way of the gun as well. The OHO is one of the worst tanks statistically on the server, and it's kind of obvious why, because it really isn't that much of a good vehicle. It's not very fast, it doesn't really have any armor because of the weak spots that it has, and the gun is actually okay. You do get the derp gun as well, which you should never use, but the gun is okay. It's basically the same gun that you just had at the tier below, but you have a little bit better standard pen and a little bit better premium pen. But it doesn't really make up for the fact that the rest of the tank isn't good. You then move up to Type 4 Heavy, and it's not an awful tank, but to grind it, it probably is. Because you're going to have to basically spend all your time grinding this tank with 450 alpha and 230 standard pen and 258 premium pen at tier 9 to then go and get a gun which is a derp gun, and then you need to go and grab this gun, which makes no sense whatsoever because this gun should be the gun that is at the top here. And the worst part is that this gun here is a good gun, but you have to go through 64,500 XP to basically then go and get 64,600 XP to get the correct gun. And I'm not going to lie, this gun basically makes it playable, because without it, it's not that playable. You have no armor, realistically. You have the HP to trade, but you can't trade it because you don't have the alpha damage. Unless you have that 600 alpha damage gun, you're not out trading people with 450 damage. Once you do get to Type 5, however, you're going to want to make sure you've got this gun, because that gun is what makes the Type 5 good. And if you don't, you're stuck with a derp gun at tier 10 with only 250 pen. Honestly, this might be one of the worst high tier grinds I've ever seen. The thing is with the Type 4 and the Type 5, as long as you do use the 600 alpha damage gun and you trade effectively, i.e. you go and trade against someone that has a 400 alpha damage gun and you play on your reload, you trade positive, you win, because you have so much more hit points than basically everybody else. And this can become not that bad to play. Most people play this tank and just go out in the open and then die because they have no clue how to play it. And I don't blame them because, yeah, the Type 4 to play this thing without the gun is horrendous. But the Type 5, as long as you do have this gun, it's fine. I'm not saying that this is the best tank in the game, because it's not, but it is playable. But the line as a whole is a horrible line to grind. Like, you start out with the Oni, which gets penned everywhere, the OHO, which gets penned everywhere, the Type 4, which, as we've already mentioned, is not that nice. And then you get the Type 5, which is fine. But the whole line, no. The thing is, they have no skill cap at all, apart from maybe trading at the higher tiers effectively. But even then, you'll quickly learn what tanks do damage and what tanks don't. So, very low skill cap, but don't grind it. We now have the STB1. Now, this line, not that bad, actually. You start out with the Chi Nu at tier 5, you then move into the Chi To, which is a general progression up through the tanks. You then go to the Chi Ri, which is just a complete, like, anomaly in the entire line. And then you go to the STA1, back to normality, which is a decent kind of tier 8 medium tank. The standard tier 8 medium tank. The reason why the Chi Ri is so different is that it gets a random autoloader, which you can put a gun rammer on, and it's just, it has no armor, but it has this autoloader. It's a weird thing, man. You then move up to Type 61, which is again an absolutely fine tank. None of these tanks realistically have armor. This is something that you need to take into note, because there's no point going into this and thinking, I can bounce stuff. No, no, no. You cannot bounce stuff. Even the STB. Ignore the fact that it has any form of armor, because it doesn't. But you do get a very, very nice gun with the Type 61 with 360 for the damage, and then 258 standard pen with 330 heat. Very nice indeed. And then you move up to the STB, which has the same style of gun, but just a lot more DPM. Now, the STB1 in general is actually quite a high skill cap tank, because people might tell you that this has armor. No. This does not have armor. None of these tanks realistically have armor. You should never rely on it. And to know where to go and how to play, you play that peekaboo role, you play with your DPM, you just peek up on a ridgeline. The STB actually has a siege mode mechanic. The others don't. The STB is the only one that has it, similar to the Type 71. But the siege mode is a little bit higher for the top speed. This is actually 30 kilometers an hour or lower to enter the siege mode in the STB, whereas it was 25 in the Type 71. But the STB has loads and loads of gun depression, and the better you are as a player, the better you'll do. And I do think that this is not a line that you should go down first. Even though the line is very, very good, it's only good for good players. And there's quite a learning curve in all of these, especially with the STA and the Type 61, to go from just playing the game to then having great games in all of these tanks. Now moving on to the Czechoslovakia tech tree with the VZ55. Now when the VZ nerfs came through, the rest of it just made it kind of a bit useless to play the double shot guns. And it just made the tanks a little bit unfun. You start out by going playing some light tanks up until tier 4 when it turns into medium tanks, and the Skoda T24 is lovely, Skoda T25 lovely, this is a lovely little autoloader actually that you can get your hands on, very very fun, and then you move into the VZ44. Now this doesn't have the double shot autoloader that I'm speaking about, but it does get a 320 alpha, which is much the same for most tier 7s, whereas 206 standard pen with 242 premium being APCR. You then move up to the tier 8, which does have the double shot autoloader, but as you can see in the difference between the two, there's not really much point using it. You'll see it has much more DPM and accuracy, as well as a better aim time on the single shotgun, whereas this is just no. So there's no real point of using the double shot autoloader when this gun exists. The exact same thing goes for the tier 9 as well. It doesn't actually even matter about the tank anymore because the entire tank line was based around these autoloaders and they're just not good. And then when you finally get to tier 10, again, the exact same thing applies where the gun is just not as good when it's an autoloader. Although I will say the tier 10 is definitely the closest to being okay as an autoloader, but still, I'd much rather just play with the single shot. And it's a shame really because the VZ55 and all of these tanks, the TNH 105, the TNH VZ51, they all had character with the double shot autoloader. It was fun. They didn't have to nerf them this hard to make them kind of a bit more balanced. Obviously, the tank was a little bit too good when it first came out, let's all face it. But it also doesn't need to be this bad now. And the weird thing is that it's not even a high skill cap tank. You probably have like a medium kind of skill cap where because of the pen levels more than anything, like you only get 306 APCR to premium pen, for example, whereas you actually get pretty good standard pen on the VZ55. Apart from that, they're pretty low skill cap kind of tanks where you can go hold down if you want to. You have a cupola that you need to watch out for. You can somewhat side scrape, not very reliably, but you could do it in a pinch. But like, I don't see the point of grinding them now. So probably medium kind of skill cap overall, and no, don't grind it. The TVP T50/51. This follows on from the Skoda T25 and you move into the T34-100, which is a pretty good way of going in through into the medium tanks. It would have been really, really nice if these tanks, the T34-100 and also the TVP VTU, had autoloaders to kind of make it more akin with the rest of the line. But it's also not bad because this tank is pretty good. The TVP VTU is questionable. But once you go ahead and get the Skoda T50, you kind of quickly forget about the TVP VTU because you have a 3-shot autoloader with 320 alpha, 248 standard pen, and 310 heat, which is very, very nice because you fire at 1.8 second intraclip reload, meaning that you can just quickly spam out your shots, go and hide again, reload, rinse and repeat, the lovely, lovely assassin style tank. And then once you get to tier 10, it just gets even better because now you have an extra shot in your magazine as well as your reload time for your intraclip being 1.5 seconds. This means that you do 1,280 damage in 4.5 seconds and then run away, rinse and repeat, do the same thing again. The TVP and the Skoda T50 are definitely high skill cap tanks because, yeah, newer players, you should avoid this line entirely because it doesn't really teach you the ways of medium tanks very well. I mean, the T34-100 would, but past that, not really. This is for the people who are already well experienced in medium tanks and know what they're doing, and they can quickly get those ambush shots out, run away, come back, rinse and repeat. Most new players are going to go in, do one clip, and then die. So, or maybe even bounce 2 or 3 shots. So you only get 2 shots in and then die. So it's definitely not one that you should go for if you're brand new to the game. We now move on to the Tesak, which, well, it's in competition for being the worst light tank at tier 10, but I think that it is still better than the WZ1321. Because at least this thing is quite funny. Following on from the Skoda T25, you then move on to the Skoda T17, which is your typical kind of light tank. It's not really that great at being a pure scout, but you do get an autoloader, which can be quite nice to use. You then go to the Blesk, which is a completely different animal altogether. You see, this thing doesn't have an auto loader, it has an auto cannon. As you will see, it does 6 damage for the standard rounds, 4 for the premium. Technically, there's no premium on this. It's just you have the standard rounds, the better pen rounds, and then the HE rounds, and none of them cost like more than the other, really. There are some that cost more than the others, but not really that big of a deal. Like, it's not the difference between a standard round and a premium round. As you'll see, you have the standard rounds being 163, what would be the premium rounds being 217, and then 37 pen for the HE. But you'll also see that there's 140 shells in a magazine. But the best thing about these is that they are just funny to use. And it will wear off eventually, the novelty of these tanks. But I'd rather have this style of tank where it has actually something that is a novelty than giving it a normal gun and it'll just be a pretty useless light tank. The thing is with this is more like a light tank hunter than like an actual light tank. Same thing goes with the Shelmer and then the Tesak at tier 10. As you'll see, what I was talking about with the shell cost, it costs 32 per shell for the standard rounds, 36 for the premium, and then 40 for the HE. So technically the HE costs the most, which is always just a weird kind of thing when you're very, very used to the standard kind of shell organization in this game. But you'll see that the AP rounds do more than the APCR rounds in regards to damage. And this is actually damage per second rather than damage per shot. But as I said, this isn't going to be a deep dive into this. The Tesak is funny. It's more of a light tank hunter, as I said, than an actual light tank. And it kind of should have been a medium tank when it got introduced, to be honest with you. It would have been better suited as a medium tank than a light tank. No, you should not go down this tech tree first. Absolutely not. The skill cap, very high, because yes, this is not an easy thing to play. We now move into the Polish tech tree with the Blyskawica. To start out this line, we go down the standard kind of light tanks at tier 1 to 4. You then move into the Zdymka, and then onto the Burza, the Govica, and the Kalana. Now, up till the Govica is basically your standard kind of tank destroyers. They don't have anything special, and they're just one shot, they do the damage, and that's it. The Govica is actually very, very good because it does get 420 alpha with 202 standard pen and 245 premium pen, being APCR. However, once you go to the Kalana at tier 8 and onwards, you get a damage reduction depending on how far away from the tank you are. As you'll see with this, you have 700 alpha at 50 meters, but if you go to 500 meters, you only get 350. You do get very, very good average penetration at 269. Nice. And 302 APCR for the premium round. So these tanks are meant to be played up close and personal and doing the damage, pulling back again afterwards, and just rinse and repeat kind of peekaboo style tanks. They are not meant to be snipers. Stop sniping at K5 in Cliff. I see you in your Blyskawica every single game. The Conqueror is basically exactly the same. These tanks have good enough frontal armor to withstand quite a few shells apart from high pen premium, and the Blitzka is exactly the same at tier 10. The Conqueror does get an upgrade with 800 alpha, the same thing as the Blyskawica right here. However, with this upgrade, you do actually get a reduction at 500 meters, which is only 300 damage. But as I said, you should never be firing from that far away anyway, and the penetration on this does make it so that you can play up close and personal with other heavy tanks. But the thing is with these tanks, they do also have some of the best shell velocity in the game. The Blitzka, for example, has like 2000 shell velocity, which is mental and what every single sniper would dream of having. But yet, it's never meant to be a sniper. But overall, the line, the only thing that you really need to watch out for, other than the damage drop-off, is that they don't get good gun arcs. The gun arc is really, really annoying on these vehicles, and honestly is one of the biggest drawbacks of the line. But if you can live with that, it's an okay line to grind. The skill cap is actually pretty high on these things because you need to know what you're doing, and you can't just get into it and play it like any other tank. So definitely a high skill cap tank, not one that you should grind, first of all, if you're brand new to World of Tanks. Moving on to the 60 TP, which is still a very, very good tank even after the nerfs, despite what people may say. Following on from the 14 TP at tier 4, you then move into the 25 TP. You then go to the 40 TP and then the 45 TP at tier 7. Now, just like with the WZ5A line, you have to wait until you get to tier 7 to get the heavy tank, which can be a problem for new players. But after going through the 25 TP and the 40 TP, which are definitely not bad tanks to deal with, you then get to this, which will teach you about heavy tanks. This is actually very, very nice. You can side scrape to a certain degree. You need to be careful though, because this is always exposed, but this is sloped up quite nicely. You do get that same tier 7 heavy tank gun with 320 alpha, 192 pen and 225 premium pen, premium pen being quite lacking though on this vehicle in particular. You then move up to tier 8, and this is honestly one of the nicest tanks at tier 8. You have 420 alpha, you have 218 standard pen, 245 premium pen, which again is pretty lacking for a tier 8 heavy tank, but the accuracy is fine, DPM is fine, and the armor is also pretty good. This tank again is just a perfect follow-on from the 45 TP that you just played. Again, you can kind of side scrape a little bit, you need to be careful of it, but overall, a good tank. And then following on that continuation, the 50 TP, you again get a gun upgrade with 560 alpha, 250 standard pen, 303 APCR as the premium round, which is not too bad at tier 9. Honestly, this tank is lovely. You have a good enough turret, good enough alpha, the pen is okay, it's nothing great, but it is good enough for tier 9, and honestly, you should go through this pretty fast to get to the 60 TP. And then once you do get here, this tank is still nice. Even after the nerfs, 750 alpha, 250 standard pen, which definitely isn't good, but you also have a caliber that's good enough to overmatch a lot of tanks. And then combine that with the 317 heat rounds, the accuracy is 0.4, but again, you have 750 alpha, so you can't really complain too much. And yes, this tank is still a very, very good vehicle. So overall for new players, no, I don't really recommend it because again, you have to wait until tier 7 to get there, and it doesn't teach you as well as say like an E100 line would. But the 60 TP is still a good tank. It doesn't require a high skill cap to play this vehicle or any of these vehicles, to be honest with you, and it is quite a nice line to go down once you do know a little bit more about the game. The CS63, this is probably the most competitive medium tank at the moment in the game. The line to get there, however, is not completely smooth sailing. You go from the 14 TP to the DZ whatever that is, and then following on from this, you get to the buggy, which is very funny. Because this gets a gun which has either a 400 alpha damage gun with 53 pen or 300 alpha with 168 pen. And if you do use the AP, it's very, very good. You then move on to the CS44, which is neither exceptional nor terrible. It just kind of sits in the middle. The same thing for the CS53. It's a little bit worse than a lot of the other tanks, but it's okay. You can get through it without too many issues. And then the CS59, which is actually a very good vehicle. You have 390 alpha at tier 9 with 252 standard pen and 293 premium APCR, which is okay for a medium tank. And then you move on to the CS63, which has 390 alpha, 258 standard pen and 315 APCR with decent accuracy. The reason why I say that is that this gun has a mind of its own when it wants to hit the target or miss the target. The accuracy number is completely irrelevant. However, what this tank does get, and none of the others have this, only the tier 10, is that it has a speed mode. This means that when you are inside speed mode, which you will activate using the X key, by default when you load into the game, you're already in it. So you'll go at 70 in the top speed in that mode, or 23 in reverse, and then you have 55 without it, or 18 in reverse. You also have a power to weight difference of nearly 20 without the mode and 30 with the mode, so you are super, super fast to get into location at the start of the game. However, this speed mode does come at a massive detriment to the accuracy. Your accuracy will bloom out massively, you will not really be able to hit anything on the move, and even if you sit still, it will take forever to come back down and you're just not accurate. So you use this mode to get into position, you then exit the mode, which I believe takes like 2 seconds or so. Yes, it takes 2 seconds to switch into and out of the mode, and then you can then play your game once you're out of the mode and in that position. Think of it like on mines, for example. If you spawn on mines, you use a speed mode, go straight up the hill, go out of the speed mode, do the damage, and then you can play your game. So for brand new players, no, do not go down this. This is not a line that you want to play as a brand new player. This also has quite a medium to high skill cap level. I'm going to stick it at high because I don't think that new players are going to do very well in this, or even people that are kind of mid-tier are going to do that well in this tank. It's really for the very, very good players who will do the best in this. Now moving on to the Swedish tech tree with the Strv 103B. This is the best sniper in the game, hands down. You have a siege mode which you can activate using the X key. You don't activate it automatically like say other tanks like the STB. And that siege mode does start from the tier 8 onwards, so the UDES 03, then the Strv 103O, and then the 103B. And within that siege mode, your accuracy becomes very, very good. You have barely any bloom, and with the UDES, for example, your DPM also increases slightly. But for the 103 and the 103B, that isn't the case. You don't get any more DPM when you switch into the siege mode. Only the accuracy as well as the dispersion and stuff like that. To get to the line, you will start out by grinding the typical low-tier light tanks, then moving into the Sav M43, which again is your typical kind of low-tier tank destroyer. You go to the IKV 103, which is actually quite a funny vehicle because you get 300 damage with a 120 pen or 140 pen, both being heat shells. You then move up to the IKV 65, again, your typical kind of tier 6 sniper, where you have 240 alpha, 180 standard pen, 230 premium pen. That's good enough. You just want to be making sure that you're at the back, sniping, not exposing yourself at all. All of these tanks, they don't do well. Well, okay, the UDES and maybe some of the others if you know what caliber they are, but they don't do very well once they're out in the open exposed. Exact same thing goes for the IKV 90. You need to be aware though that these tanks don't have super good gun arcs, so you will be turning the tank quite a bit as well though. So, and then once you do all of this, you then move up to the UDES 03. Now this has a gun which is lovely. 390 alpha, 288 standard pen with 330 APCR as its premium round. Really, really nice gun. Obviously, you activate into siege mode. You then become much slower in the siege mode. You can use a turbo to boost this up. Basically, the way the siege mode works is you can't move the gun other than up and down, or mostly just up, without going into siege mode. But when you do enter the siege mode, you then become very, very slow, but you have full control like you would, like you're basically just a turret. Exactly the same thing applies for the STRV 1030. You get the gun where you have 390 alpha, 308 standard pen, which is among some of the highest in the game, and then 350 APCR as the premium round. You get the exact same gun on the STRV 103B, but this is just slightly better DPM and a little bit better accuracy as well. Speaking about accuracy, it's quite annoying because the UDES actually gets better accuracy than the 1030, and you can feel it sometimes. Because these tanks are meant to be all the way at the back of the map, just sniping from the back, just putting shots in. And if you do that with the 1030, you can definitely notice that it's less accurate. The 103B, however, though, doesn't care. This thing is super, super accurate. And the reason why I was saying earlier about the UDES and the STRV and the 103B, how it might matter depending on what gun they're using, their caliber, that's because depending on the caliber that is shooting you, it might just auto-ricochet. Because as you can see, these tanks are stupidly flat. They're like a doorstop, where if they actually shoot this and they don't have a high enough caliber to overmatch you, they just don't pen. However, if they are using heat, you need to be aware of this, and they will pen you every single time, apart from the STRV 103B, because this actually has heat shields at the front here, which will absorb it. And the calibers you need to be aware of is anything greater than 60 caliber for the UDES will overmatch you, anything greater than 120 caliber will overmatch the 1030, and anything greater than a 150 caliber will overmatch the 103B. There are spots on the 1030 and the 103B that are 60mm thick, but most of the time they're just going to shoot you where they can actually pen. So overall for this line, no, I don't recommend it as a new player, and it is actually quite a high skill cap tank, because unless you get a game where everybody just sits out in front of you and you can farm them, you're not going to do loads of damage without actually using your brain and moving around the map. Another thing to note with these is that they do all get very, very good camo and good reverse speed as well. So these are very fast, very sneaky, good camo, good gun, everything you need as a sniper. Moving on to the Kranvagn, and this is one of the saddest lines in the game, to be honest. Because I loved my Kran before it got nerfed, and the line leading up to it, it's not great. First of all, you have to go through medium tanks until you reach tier 8, where you have basically no practice in these vehicles at all, and then suddenly the playstyle just changes massively with the Emil 1. The tanks leading up to this are actually really good. Tier 5 is good, the STRV-74 is very good at tier 6, and the Leo is very nice at tier 7. But then once you get to the Emil 1, the problem with this tank is that it's meant to have turret armor, and realistically, it doesn't. Or at least it does, but only against standard rounds. The Emil 1, 2, and the Kranvagn all have 3 shell autoloaders, as you can see here. The Emil 1 has a 360 alpha damage one with 217 standard pen and 242 premium pen, which is APCR. As I said though, this one is not really very good because the turret armor just doesn't do enough at its tier. You then move up to the M2, which does have a much nicer autoloader with 440 alpha, which is exactly the same one that you actually get on the Kranvagn, but obviously the Kranvagn gets a little bit of a tweaked stats. You have 252 standard pen with 300 heat pen, which is not great, but also not completely useless either. Like, vast majority of the time, you can pen stuff with 300 heat. It's just that you need to make sure that you're actually hitting what you're aiming at. But the M2 definitely does have a much better turret than the M1 does. And this is a true ridgeline tank. You can go on a ridgeline, you will bounce shots, even very, very high pen TDs, unless it's like a Jagdpanzer 100, in which case then you're not safe at all. But for the most part, you go on a ridgeline and you just watch people cry because they cannot pen you. You do need to be aware, though, that when you do use all your gun depression, you expose your cupolas because as you're looking down, this back bit goes up, exposing all of these. But the M1 really does prepare you for the Kranvagn at tier 10, and as you can see with this, it's just a little bit better DPM and a little bit better accuracy in comparison to the M2. But the Kranvagn at tier 10 really is one of those ridgeline kings. However, it's definitely not as fast as it used to be. It doesn't have loads of hit points, and it really doesn't do that well when it's not on a ridgeline. It is, however, still a fun tank, but you need to know what you're doing, and especially considering that the tank basically, or the tank line starts at tier 8, yeah, you definitely need to have a little bit of knowledge in World of Tanks to actually go and play these. So it's definitely not a super high skill cap tank, but it's definitely not a easy one to just go and pick up and play. Also, the gun can definitely troll you sometimes, so keep that in mind. The UDES 1516. This is a tank that I don't like, but many people do. It follows on from the Leo at tier 7, which is a lovely tank, into the UDES 145. This tank basically has no armor, but does have a pretty nice gun. You have 360 alpha, 217 standard pen, and 253 premium pen, being APCR. It does have a siege mode, which activates when you're under 19 kilometers an hour, and it basically doesn't really do anything to prepare you for what you're about to play next, which is the UDES 16, because this does have turret armor, does have hull armor to a certain degree, but isn't really like what you've just played. You do get a gun upgrade, although calling that upgrade might be a little bit questionable because you get 390 alpha, 234 standard pen, and 263 premium pen with APCR, which doesn't feel very good at tier 9 at all. And the accuracy is also not very good. So this tank is basically, you want to be on a ridgeline and trying to use your turret armor as best as you can. However, you also have pretty good camo, so you can afford to play a little bit more of a supporting role as and when you can. Because you don't always have armor. And it may not be clear when you do or don't have armor, because sometimes you can peek a ridgeline and just get penned. But it does set you up to knowing what is going to happen at tier 10 with the UDES 1516, and it's definitely an upgrade. I really didn't enjoy my time playing the UDES 16 at all. And while I don't enjoy the UDES 1516, I definitely preferred it than the UDES 16. This does get a decent gun upgrade with 440 alpha, 254 standard pen, which is not great for a medium tank, but you do get 310 heat as your premium round. The gun is still sometimes a bit derpy, but you do get very nice DPM at 2.8k. This tank is good on a ridgeline, apart from the fact that randomly it will get penned, again, in the cupola right here, which everybody seems to do to me, but if I tried to do it to them, it doesn't really work. It also has a siege mode with anything under 20 kilometers an hour, which does feel quite slow at times, and you need to kind of use the siege mode, which can be quite fiddly and just annoying to use to get all your gun depression that you need to then make your armor really, really good. However, this does have lovely, lovely camo rating, and again, you can afford to kind of back off a little bit and just double bush and try to shoot people as and when you can. So at the end of the day, this tank is objectively a good vehicle, but it really doesn't like me and I don't like it. Another thing that you need to take into consideration as well is that the shell velocity on the standard rounds, it being APCR, you would expect it to be quite fast. It isn't. It's 1000 meters a second, which does feel really slow, and you only get 840 meters a second on the heat round. So the UDES 1516, high skill cap tank. This is not an easy tank to play. Neither is the entire line. You obviously start from the tier 8 to get this kind of siege mode and learning how to play it, but it's definitely not easy. and definitely not one that you should go down straight away. We now move on to the final nation, which is the Italian tech tree, starting out with the Minotauro. This is one of the dumbest lines in the entire game. You start out by going down the low tiers, which actually starts at tier 2 for the medium tanks, which is quite interesting, but you get to P26/40, that then moves on to the Semovente. This is your typical tier 5 tank destroyer. There's nothing much to say here. You then move on to the Bassotto, which is quite a funny vehicle actually, because if you use this gun, you have 360 alpha with 230 pen with the heat rounds, which is, yeah, that does quite the funny. You also get 440 alpha with the 105, but be warned, this is obviously at tier 6. I mean, the 230 AP pen, or sorry, heat pen is quite nice, but yeah, that 105 with HE, not so good. But if you don't want to do that and mess around with it, then you could use this gun, which is 360 alpha, which again, at tier 6 is really nice, with 175 pen and 215 premium pen. 215 premium pen being heat rounds as well, so it doesn't matter about the distance. But from that, you then move on to the SMV CC56, and it's completely different from what you've just played. From here on out, you have autoloaders, which have basically a really, really weird way of doing it. Because instead of where normal autoloaders work, where you have like quite a short intro clip, maybe like 4 seconds maximum, this has a 7-second intro clip, which means that you fire a shot, wait 7 seconds, then fire the next one, which can be very confusing for the enemy to actually count the shots properly. You have 320 alpha, 175 standard pen, 212 premium pen, which is actually exactly the same as what I've just said on the Bassotto, which is the tier below. Actually, the Bassotto gets more premium pen. Lovely. Either way, it doesn't actually matter. It's not very accurate, but this tank is a brawling tank. You have a turret, which isn't a fully traversable turret, but you can go in and you can do a lot of damage because you're basically impenetrable. Exactly the same thing applies to the CC67. It's basically the same playstyle. You have an upgraded gun, which now does 400 alpha, still that 7-second intro clip. And instead of 18 seconds, which is on the CC to reload the full clip, it's actually 25 on this because it's a little bit more of an alpha damage increase. You do, however, on this vehicle, get 120 HE pen, which is very, very nice, especially at tier 8, where you're going to see quite a few tanks that have less armor. Again, though, not very accurate at all. And still exactly the same with the I can't pen you mentality of a hold down tank. There are bits and pieces that you can pen, but for the most part, it is very, very hard to actually pen these tanks. You then move up to the CC Mark II, which again gets a lovely gun upgrade to 490 alpha, 250 standard pen with 325 heat pen. But again, not very accurate with 0.24. And you actually have an 8-second intro clip reload this time. And then once again hitting you with that good luck mentality when facing it hold down. These two bits either side, you can actually pen there, so the more you know. Once you get up to tier 10 though, you are once again greeted with another gun upgrade. This one now has 530 alpha with 265 standard pen and 330 heat for the premium pen. You have 8-second intro clip reload, exactly the same as the CC Mark II, but you have lovely DPM, even though that it doesn't always feel like you have lovely DPM. The accuracy is still pretty bad, although the aim time is not too bad overall. Now, in recent times, this has actually been nerfed to being somewhat pennable. You can now pen this cupola here and also the left-hand side here. It used to be basically you would be on a ridgeline and nothing would pen you, which was lovely. This also got minus 10 degrees of gun depression. It still does, but this turret really is very, very strong, and it still is incredibly strong to this day. Honestly, this tank destroyer line is very low skill cap, and yeah, even if you're new, maybe consider going down it, because there isn't much you can mess up. If you go out in the open, for example, the chances are they'll probably bounce. So it can be very forgiving. The gun isn't too bad. You don't really feel the autoloader kind of mentality with this. Like, you can't just go out and clip someone and then that's it, because you have such a long intro clip. So you don't kind of get baited into that aspect of, I just want to do one more shot. I just want to do one more shot. This, I think, is an okay kind of beginner line. I wouldn't say that it's a golden line. Like, I wouldn't recommend this over like a 268 line or 277 or anything like that. But it is okay. Now it's time for the Rinoceronte. Oh dear. I'm just going to say it. I don't know why anybody would grind this line, because there are better tanks out there that don't have the gimmicky kind of auto-reloader system that has the compensation mechanic. For those of you that don't know, from tier 8 onwards, you have an auto-reloader system, but it's not like other auto-reloaders. You see, with the standard auto-reloader, you will have one shell go in, which is usually your longest shell. and you then wait until that shell is loaded, and it will automatically start reloading the next shell like it would be an auto loader, but instead of loading the full clip, you're loading them one at a time, and you can interrupt that by shooting. But with these, they tried to make it a little bit more of a gimmicky kind of auto reloader system where if you fired and it was quite close to being at the end of a reload, it would then compensate you. And in reality, it doesn't really work that well. Like, you might as well just wait for that extra shell to go in. The line in general starts out with mediums up until the tier 7. Again, not a very great start if you are brand new to the game, but if you're brand new to the game, do not grind this tank line. The P43 and the P43 Bis are lovely. Actually, very, very nice. You will not have too many issues with these two. You then move into the Caro P88, which is fine. The thing is with this tank, it doesn't have the auto reload system. It's just got a standard gun, 240 alpha, 202 standard pen, 220 premium pen. It doesn't have that 320 alpha, which lots of the other heavies do at this stage. And it does feel like quite a small vehicle in comparison to some of the other heavies. But it's not too bad. You'll get through it eventually and move on to the Progetto 54. This is where you will start to have the auto reloader system. As you will see, it says standard time for auto reloading one shell. 16 seconds, 15 seconds, 13 seconds. So there's 3 shells in a magazine that it can be loaded maximum, and the starting shell is 16 seconds, then it will start loading the next shell for 15, then the next shell for 13, and then it will stop after that one. This does mean that you could fire one shell and basically only have that 13-second reload to then load that next one. Or you could fire all 3, and you'll be loading back down to the 16-second. As I said, these in particular do have a compensation mechanic, which I don't really think is that much of a good thing because it's more of a gimmick than anything else. The tank itself, not bad. The actual auto reloader though, not great because you basically don't have any DPM. 13 seconds to load 320 alpha is not good. And the thing is with these tanks is that you can't put a gun rammer on them. So there's no real way of getting that down quite substantially. For example, the T29 has roughly a 13-second reload base for its 320 alpha. But you can put vents, you could put rammer on it, and it will go down dramatically. Whereas with this, you have quite bad DPM, and if you're loading for 16 seconds, that's even worse. You then progress your way, slowly probably, to the Progetto 66. Now, this tank actually isn't that bad. The armor on it is pretty good, and the gun is pretty nice. However, it just lacks the DPM. This is a common occurrence with basically all of this line. They're not bad guns inherently, they just really don't have any DPM. And honestly, the Progetto 66 is probably the star of this line because it feels the most like a heavy tank. Because once you move up to the Rinoceronte, you do get a gun upgrade with 490 alpha, but your DPM is just so bad. Especially if you fire all your shells and you have a 20-second reload for 490 alpha. That is not good. At this point, a Jagdpanzer 100 could out-reload you, and it would do 1,000 something damage, and you would do 490 back to it. But I think that the worst thing about the Rinoceronte is that it doesn't really have any armor. You have this pyramid on top of the tank, which is always visible, and also either side here, if you have enough heat rounds, you just go straight through it. So even if you're using your full gun depression, you're still always getting penned in this little pyramid at the top here. And even if you are on flat ground, you get penned either side. So really the Rhino tech tree, it just isn't very good. Listen, there are people that love it, and that's fine, but it is not a good vehicle. It's very high skill cap to actually get the most out of the gun because you need to know exactly when you should fire, when you should save your shots, etc. And that can be very, very confusing for new players. So definitely a high skill cap tank, but it's just not very good in general. Even if you perfect everything, it's still not a good tank. And considering that the line starts at tier 7 as well, it's not very good at all. And finally, the Progetto 65. This again has the same auto reloader style as the Rinoceronte, however, this doesn't have the compensation mechanic, and that starts from tier 8 onwards. To get there, you go from the P43 Bis to then the P43 Tur. The P43 Tur is lovely, just the same as the P43 Bis. You shouldn't have any issues going through this. Now, the Pantera, once you get to tier 8, is actually a very good tank. And unfortunately, I have a bug where it says that it only has 2 shells in the magazine. That is wrong. It has 3. And I don't know why it shows this. Because as you'll see, if I go onto my press account, it then displays the correct stats. So I really don't know what's happening here. But basically, it has 240 alpha, 212 standard pen, 259 premium, the exact same kind of stats as what you'd see on the Progetto 46, but it just doesn't get as good as DPM. But still, the reload times are fine, and honestly, accuracy and everything else, this tank is good. You then move up to Standard B, which can be quite annoying because it really doesn't feel as accurate as it really should be. This does get 268 Standard Pen with 330 heat, which is lovely. However, it really does bloom out a lot, and the gun just doesn't feel nice to play with. And then after you get your way through that tank, you then get to another tank, which also has the same kind of issue, where you have a decent enough pen with the alpha and everything else, and it's got an auto reloader, but it just doesn't feel that nice to play because the gun blooms out quite a lot. And honestly, ever since the Progetto line got nerfed, it is really in a shadow of its former self. And the Progetto 65, I struggle to see reasons why people would play this tank anymore. So definitely a high skill cap tank, because I think most of these auto reloader tanks are, unless they're an inverse auto reloader. And honestly, I see no reason why people would grind it though. And that will wrap up everything for which tech tree should you grind. If you did enjoy this video, please do subscribe and give me a like, because this took forever to make. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.